Chaim, Sidim Chaim. Nur even op zijn liegen. Dus een gaat ook liggen van je. Find ourselves in the Mitzvah of Tishrei, and it was customary by the Rebbe that the Rebbe would always Farbrengen at the end of the day, the second evening, not the first evening. The Rebbe explained more than once that this is the inyan of Kabikochim Halayla Ilachach Alayim. So the Mela, the night, by Kochim, by sacred matters, it goes according to the night after the day. Likewise, Benegiyat Yutas Kislev, Yud Shvat, Yutas Tammuz was always the night after. Vov Tishrei is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Tzachana. This year it's 57 years since the Stalkos of the Rebbe Tzachana. And although it's 57 years, which is a big number, I mean a large number, it's not like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the Hulu. Afal Pikein, those that were there then, will never forget it, because the impression that it made them that what took place Shabbos, what took place after Shabbos, as we'll mention further. Since we're discussing a yahrzeit of a person, a personality, Ein HaMalchus, mother of the Rebbe, and as the Rebbe once said in the Sikha from Shabbos B'Shalach, Tavshem Memalef, that the qualities that he has are based on the goals of his mother. In other words, it's thanks to the goals of his mother that she aimed to have the qualities that Rebbe says that I had, that the inyanim that I have. I mean, you say the word qualities, the inyanim that I have. It shows the closeness, the relationship between the Rebbe and his mother. So Mela, it's understood to give an overview Benegiyah to her life, and then, as we see over the years, lessons that the Rebbe derived from her life and what we learn from it. The Rebbetzin was born in Nikolaev. She was born in the year Tafresh Mem, 1880. Early 1880, Chokhes Tevis, the 28th of Tevis. She was 6 months older than the previous Rebbe, than her Mechutin. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, here in America, would send her Mazel Tov letters for her Yom Haledes, and he would wash it, I think they were Mamash Bittul. We covered her Yom Haledes, 28th of Tevis. The Rebbetzin, as a young girl, maybe a teenager, so she would write over Maimonim that came from Lubavitch. When Maimonim came from Lubavitch, there were no copy machines, so she would write over the Maimonim that she would be able to share it with others. As we find also in Russia, when Yidden came out from Russia with Bichlach or different Sovim, books of written Chassidus, it was basically they would ask someone to write over a Maimer and they would pay the person. The person had a nice handwriting, they would give him to write over a Maimer. And that's how many people have copies of Maimonim, because they were written over. They were not mamish published because the Rabbeim didn't always publish the Maimonim. The Rebbe Rashab did not want to publish his Maimonim. Till here in America, that's when the Rebbe started to publish it. The Rebbe mentioned it in the Yechitas. The only one Rebbe that published Mamish's Maimonim was the Michoel Rebbe, published it Bechayov. Of course, by the Rebbe, the manifold. But basically, by the Michoel Rebbe, he published the Maimonim, and the Rebbe says that what is the point of that? It was the union of Afotzes HaMayonis Chutza. It was the union of spreading the offsprings of Chassidus. So he published his own Maimonim. By the Alter Rebbe, he didn't write. He just wrote the Tanya, and a few Maimonim in Tereir that we have Lo Shein Admur Nishma Zeidim Ba'atzmi, that the Alter Rebbe wrote. Alderach Zeh by the Tzemach Tzedek is also, he didn't publish in his time, and Tavshin Chavs in the 1960s, the Rebbe published the Eira Teira sets. Today it's 45 volumes, and that alone is a drop in the ocean. Because the Tzemach Tzedek wrote in his lifetime, there's a cheshbon of 600,000 pages. He wrote every day from Bar Mitzvah, 24 pages. And there were fires, 2 big fires in Lubavitch, and a lot was burned in the fires. And so what we have is Eira Teira, 45 volumes, is Mamish Testachelik. And as the Frierdiker Rebbe discusses in a Rishima, the Frierdiker Rebbe says in Rishimas Lubavitch, he says, how did it take place? He says the fires Pasha took place sometimes even from Balagola, wagon to a rider. He went into Lubavitch, and when he went into Lubavitch to do business or something, he lit a cigarette, and the tree caught fire, and they were running to people, certain people who they had the ksavim by them, and they were trying to save them. And he says, "Oh, I forgot about it." He had a honey business. He was thinking about the honey, and the ksavim were burned. It was a big loss for the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek once said, when he asked about a certain Bichot Chassidus, he says, I couldn't take it because it says it's a chayrim, you're not allowed to look in it. So he says, where's your Mesiras Nefesh Chassidus? That's where a lot was burned. The whole from the Rebbe Marash Svarim began being published in the 1940s. Frierdiker Rebbe started to publish his grandfather's Svarim. That was the first project as Svarim. As booklets, Kuntreisim, it was the Rebbe Rashab's Kuntreisim, the early 40s. But then Teira Shmuel started to come out, one after the other. And the Frierdiker Rebbe dedicated it, Lilin Nishmas, his mother, his grandmother, the Rebbe Marash. It was an interesting Hakdoshes. And I think to this very day, although for new editions, other people are participating, but that Hakdosha is always left. It's like a fixed Hakdosha. Hamsheichem, Teira Shmuel. The Rebbe Rashab is Bechlal not printed. The Rebbe mentioned it to the Gerer Rebbe and others, that it was a seder that the Rebbe Rashab did not want his Chassidus printed. I think the condition was unless it's a Rasha Ashius. The Pale, the Rebbe says that Frierdiker came to America and he published the continuation of the Rebbe Rashab. But the Rebbe Rashab Svarim began going to print was in Tov Shin Lamed Aleph. That's 1971 or late 70. The Hamshach Samachvov, the famous series of Maimonim, that was the first one. And the Rebbe said he hopes this will be a good beginning. And after that, about 5 years later, actually 6 years later, the Rebbe printed another Hamshach called the Hamshach Ayin Beis, which was delivered by the Rebbe Rashab in 1912, 144 Maimonim, which he abruptly stopped when he left Lubavitch. He moved to Rostov. So B'meila, these were all inyanim that were being published then, late 70s, early 80s. And the Rebbe encouraged it. Sometimes they were even pushing it from the library. They were preparing it, and the Rebbe says, like, who's preparing all this? It was like all set up already. And that's how we saw a lot of Svarim of the Rebbe Rashab. Because in the 1950s, when the Rebbe would say a Maimer, and he would sometimes base it on the Maimer of earlier Rebbe, he would publish a kuntres, an individual Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, for example, and he would say that the Maimer that was said this previous Shabbos is based on the Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab. So we had about 5 or 10 Maimonim. I remember as Bocharim, up to 1970, we had about 10 Maimonim, single Maimonim from the Rebbe Rashab, that were published on the occasion of different Shabbosim that the Rebbe said Maimonim. The Friedrich Rebbe's Maimonim already the Rebbe pushed to be published in the 1940s, 1947 or 1945. There was already a dedication of Chassidim and the Rebbe also put his name in, dedication to print a certain sefer of the Friedrich Rebbe, which was in honor of the Friedrich Rebbe being involved in public affairs, Askonis Aklal, in Tov Reish Nunhei, Tov Shinhei, 50 years. Since he became involved, he was 15 years old, his father took him into the work. So basically, the covered that, the covered the Chagiga. So the Rebbe pushed they should publish, and they signed their name, their mother's name, I think, the family name. And the Rebbe Svarim, in the beginning, the Rebbe was very particular that things should not be published under his name unless he sees it. And that's Tishrei and other places, because sometimes it really went wild. A Sikha from the Rebbe, they published it. They didn't figure it needs to go through something. The Rebbe wanted everything should be reviewed. So finally, the first Maimer that the Rebbe published was Beis Iyar Tavshin Yud Aleph. This was a few months after Yud Shvat when he delivered his first Maimer, so waited till Beis Iyar. And the Rebbe, they say, also rewrote the Maimer. So the whole Eitan was very particular, but after that, the Rebbe once said a Lashon, that is a chassid of printing. The Rebbe said, "I'm a chassid for drukim. I'm a chassid of printing." The Rebbe would push everyone to print. The Rebbe said that Tzemach Tzedek says that something that was published is the data is eternal. So maybe the Rebbe would very much encourage people to print, people that would do individual shiurim. The Rebbe would encourage them that they should compile it together. It should be one whole sefer. And many people had Irgun from the Rebbe. So it was that time that the Maimonim were not really published in the time of the Rebbe Rashab. So the Rebbe Tzimchana would write over the Maimer, and the middle they would have a copy that they will be able to forward it to Chassidim, to be able to learn it. So this was one of the yonim that she did Pashit in her youth. And the Rebbe says nobody forced her to do it. She did it on her own. Me'atzma, her own will. The Rebbetzin got married to the Rebbe's father in the year Tishrei Samach 1900. The Rebbe Rashab was Sadi Kedushin. And the Rebbe was born Tishrei Samach Beis, 1902. Yud Aleph Nisan. And there were specific heroes that the Rebbetzin had from the Rebbe Rashab when he came to the Rebbe as an infant. That every time he wakes up, they should wash his hands before he's given food, is being nourished. There was a certain heroes that were mamish from his youth. The Rebbetzin tells that. In fact, the Rebbetzin told a few of these inyanim to a famous writer of Nissen Gordon, and it was published in the Yiddish Haim in the early 60s. The Rebbe generally would review the Yiddish Haim. It was a quarterly from the Shei of Neis Chabad. In English, it's called the Jewish Home. So there was a Yiddish section, there was an English section. One was not a translation of the other. There were different articles. And there's a lot of articles there. It started in the late 1950s. And interesting article. I'm not going to go into it now, but there's interesting articles that people raise questions today about certain things, and they're discussing it there already. Hanukkah gifts. Is it comes from Eden, doesn't come. So you have two women writing. One writes one thing, the other one writes the opposite. This is Mamish in the early 60s. Very interesting. They're ready to look at things. And the Rebbe would edit it. When this column started, Nissen Gordon is giving over the memoirs from the Rebbetzin. He would interview the Rebbetzin Hanan. She would give over stories. And the Rebbe asked that they should stop it. They should stop writing. And they continued. Ich weiß nicht exactly what it was. It was the Rebbetzin wanted it should be ich weiß nicht what. So the Rebbe stopped editing the Yiddish section. So from then on, the Rebbe did not edit the Yiddish section anymore, just continued with the English one, mamish up till late 1980s. In the Tshudah, we see the Rebbe tells Gerari, Tana Gerari, that, okay, that he's stopped it already then. But there's a lot of articles written by Daniel Goldberg, others, mamish full hagos, a lot of comments in Yonim that the Rebbe wrote on that. So basically, the Rebbetzin would push it, tell stories that took place by the Rebbe as a child, as a teenager, stories that firsthand heard from the Rebbetzin alone. In later years, in the years that the Rebbe was growing up, Mamish's first 10 years of his life, they lived in Nikolai. They would spend a lot of time by the parents of Rebbetzin Chana, Rabbi Michoel, and after that, in 1909, the Rebbe's father received a position in Yekaterinoslav, and that's when he moved to Yekaterinoslav. Became a Rav there, a Rav in a shul, and he was there for 30 years, until he was arrested a few days before Pesach, 1939. The Rebbe writes, Benegir to the Kaddish, that he would say for his grandmother after Simchas Torah, the day later, Easter Chag. So the Rebbe says that this is for his grandmother, who raised him, in a sense, Tiflo Bi. She raised him, educated him when he visited Nikolaev. I think it was Benegir to the summer. And the whole way from this was, the Rebbe explained what the Kaddish was about. Called Tishrei, a day before, after Simchas Torah. It was then 1939 that the Rebbe's father was arrested. They came to the house, they did a search. Kavyochel, they're coming for a search, but they arrested him. And the mailer from then on started the next 5 years. The Rebbe's father was wandering from one exile to another. There's a Mishima that he wrote about his exiles. He says, I am this and this person, the son of this person. Ani Levi Yitzchak ben Zel de Rochel. And he writes that he went through all these 5 exiles, the different cities, and he explains it in a Kabbalistic way. This is one of the first things that the Rebbe spoke in public, Chafov, was Benegir to this Inyan, Benegir to this Yeshima. The Rebbe explains it like Chassidus in Farbrengen Chafov, Tavshin Chav Ches, 68. It was that time finally when he got to Alma-Ata, and that's when he wanted to write. He wrote the message of all the years. He wrote chidushim, comments on different svarim. What we have is the Tanya and the Zayar. But the Pale, he wrote also. The Rebbe says there's more writings that never got to us. So the Rebbe mentions that the Rebbetzin, in order to produce ink, the Rebbetzin would go out in the field and she would take grass and process it. And the Rebbe said it more than once. She wasn't an expert in making ink, so therefore sometimes the ink is green, blue, red, different colors. And that's obvious because the one that worked on the Rebbe's father's ksovim on the Zayah sees the color on the margin, sees the color of the ink. Sometimes this color, that color, is what he managed to wrote. And the Rebbe says because there was a shortage of paper, he couldn't write but just brief on the margin of the Sefer. As we mentioned further, that the Rebbe Pashit would speak every Shabbos Farbrengen. The Rebbe would elaborate on a comment from his father on Zayah. And today we have the Feres Levi Yitzchak, the union of Biurim from the Rebbe on the Zayah, his father's story. And the Rebbe would make mention of it. Since he wrote it in short, so we need to understand what does it mean? It's in short, he doesn't explain it. So the Rebbe says he relied that we're going to be able to understand it. And the Rebbe says especially that he was short of paper, so therefore he needed to write a brief. So the Rebbe would explain at the Farbrengen what it meant Kabbalistically or in Avodas Hashem or Apichsidis. Sometimes we have a Zayah that's the only ha'orah from the Rebbe's father on that Zayah, and it's a certain parsha that the Rebbe would Farbrengen quite often, sometimes a year after year. So the Rebbe would go back to that ha'orah, add more things. Pasha would explain weiter, new inyanim, new insights on that ha'orah. He was in Tafshin Dalet, that the Rebbetzin was together with her husband, and the Rebbe says, Be'etzem, she didn't have to go there. She could have remained home in Yerkatir Maslam, but she wanted to be together with him, to give him support, moral support, physical support. It was then that the Rebbe's father got sick and made it the Yisurim, and they lived mamish in a very limited, restricted format. The house wasn't a big house. The Rebbetzin mentions in her memoirs, its memoirs are about 130 pages. She writes in the beginning, I'm not a writer, I'm not a daughter of a writer. But the Pil Mamish, she managed to write 130 pages describing Pashut what went through there, and she did not want it to get to the Rebbe. So she sent it to her cousin in Tishrei, and somehow Chassidim found out about it and it came back here. I don't know if somebody sent it to the Rebbe, but she tried to avoid the Rebbe shouldn't have any agony in the Agnes Nefesh with that. So the Peil, she mentions there the conditions that they lived in, and she mentions that finally, we managed to get a new dish. It's a glass dish. It's like the new tzemazel. We get the dish. As soon as we come home, the dish falls, it breaks. This is like before Pesach, she says, this is what it looked like. It was a very shvera matzah. There were certain Chassidim who were there that they physically helped the Rebbe's father, the Raskin family, and David Raskin, his brothers, and his father. And they were, the Pashut there, they came in very handy because he needed help, especially later in the Mamish, in the last Kufa, when he was very sick and it was hard for him to move around. It was before he was Niftar. He said, he was speaking about, he was Parsha Eikid, he was speaking about Ikvese de Meshicha. And he said, he gave a krecht, he says, Ikvese de Meshicha. Ikves Meshicha. And he was Niftar Chofov. Interesting to note that the Rebbe was doubtful a few years if Chofov is accurate. Because sometimes the Rebbe figured that it was a day later. And you find up till a few years later that the Rebbe is writing to people in Yisrael who may have some information to find out if it's accurately Chafov. On the Peil, it was Chafov. But the Rebbe wanted to make sure, so for a few years the Rebbe was trying to find it, and the Rebbe wrote to someone, do not discuss it with my mother. I don't want it to be on her mind because it will bring back her memories. But the Peil, the Rebbe from aside, he was trying to verify by a few people. We see it in the letters, I think even in the printed English. It was then, during the wartime, that the Rebbetzin came out, and she came through Poking, and that's when the Rebbe traveled to France again. The Rebbe came in 1947, and he was there from Purim till after Shavuos. And then he took care of all the papers, and came back with his mother to the United States. It happens to be Bashdocha Pratis, Chof Chasiv. Again, that very same date that the Rebbe came back, became the first time with the Rebbetzin. And the Rebbetzin then settled in Crown Heights. She lived originally on Lincoln Place and Kingston, and after that she moved to President in Kingston. And the Rebbe would visit her every day. It was like a certain time in the afternoon. I think I remember vaguely that it was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Rebbe would come, sit down, would sometimes pour a tea, and that's it. And the Rebbetzin felt that if the Rebbe is already there, she wanted the Rebbe should sit longer, he should relax. She knew what the Rebbe's schedule is. So she was trying to extend the conversation that the Rebbe should push it, he should push it, sit, menuchas hanefesh, menuchas haguf. So the eunuch gives over, who was eager to be a Misharas by the Rebbetzin Beisarav. He says that the Rebbe said, I have to go back to my job. That's what the Rebbe said, I have to go back to work. So he went back to 770. But basically, the Rebbetzin felt those few minutes that he's in the house, she looked after him, as much as she could chapara. Another time it's told when he gave to the Rebbe that the Rebbe once came from 770 and he drove by his mother's house to see her because he was at the AO during the daytime. And the Melee just came to see her. She was standing outside. The Rebbetzin would stand a lot outside. She would meet people. She would stop people. It was very, very social. It was like unusual, but she'd stopping people, talking with them, and very sensitive to their needs, to their situation. It was a very interesting relationship, especially with the neighbors in the building. So the Peyo, the Rebbe comes out of the car, and she says to the Rebbe, Geh yahim, ist noch nicht gegessen hat. Go home, you didn't eat yet today. So he says, how do you know I didn't eat? So the Rebbe says, so the Rebbetzin says, I see you now, and Lekinsky is driving you. When he drives you, I know he took you to the AO. That means you didn't eat today. Go home. Mother telling her son, go home. He smiled at Rebbe, he went back into the car and went home. It was interesting, the thing that people Pashat saw was in the street. Al Kaponim, it was, the Rebbetzin had a place in 770. In the original Weiber Shul, the women's shul, there was the first section of the women's shul, when there was a third of 770 existing, third of the shul, up till 68, or actually late 67, there was a certain corner where the Rebbetzin, at Mamish in the corner, the mizrach of that section, she would have a chair there, a special chair, and there were times that they say, when the Rebbe came to Farbrengen, the Rebbe would look up to see if his mother is here already. And then he would begin the Farbrengen. It was Rosh Hashanah when there was a fire in the women's shul, and one of the things that burned was the Rebbetz's chair. It was 6 days before Tishrei. I remember the fire was in the middle of the tefillah, in the middle of davening. What we were hearing was that the Rebbe said everybody should go up and then he'll go out. But they managed to extinguish the fire, but this was what was burned in fire. It was definitely Shoshana. Farbrengen, the Rebbe would wash for Farbrengen at the end of the day, the end of the second day Yom Tov. A short Farbrengen. In those years, Rosh Hashanah was like an hour and a half Farbrengen, that was it. And the Vad HaMesader was a new Vad HaMesader. It was a new Vad HaMesader means those that make organize things in 770, the Farbrengens, the tables, the benches. If there's any issues going on, they need to take care of it. If there's any pushing, people should have seats, especially when a distinguished person comes from somewhere. They needed to, and the Rebbe looked at them because they expected they should keep order. So there was a new Vada Mesader, or new groups were added, and they made their announcement that after the Farbrengen, they say there will be the Rebbe will bench, then the Rebbe will have Ma'ariv, and he'll make Havdalah, and then the Rebbe will distribute Keshel Bracha. And they asked everybody should go with order, with a Seder, a very organized manner. Al Kaponim, the Rebbe then announced his announcement. The Seder V'Zayin Hazeh, that's the way they would announce. The Seder will be as follows. So the Rebbe said the Seder will be as follows. We're going into a new year. The Mele Yidden will learn Torah and they'll fulfill mitzvahs, and the Eibishter will give that Yidden will have a ksiva, v'achsima teva, and all the brachas. And then the Rebbe concludes, Aziyot geheißen the Naya Vad HaMesader. He says, this is how the new Vad HaMesader ordered. So is that Farbrengen? Towards the end of Farbrengen, the Rebbe asked that they should Farbreng every day of Aseret Shemei Tshuva, which is very unusual because even by Chassidim, Simcha, Aseret Shemei Tshuva, Farbrengen every day is Abisel Lepes Nit Poshet. So the Veil, the Rebbe asked the Farbrengen, and what Chassidische Farbrengen can accomplish, Malach HaChol can't accomplish. And it's interesting because there's something, Siddim didn't realize it then, but when you read it now, and then you see what happened a few days later, you see the Rebbe saw something coming. Generally, the Rebbe would fight off in Yonim, Dafke with the union of Simcha. With joy. Farbrengen. Derech like you have the Moshe Yom Kippur. There's the Muhammad that began on Yom Kippur. Toshin Lamedalet, late 73. So nice from 47 years. 47 years since the war in Yom Kippur. Akoponim, so there was the Rebbe spoke then about the union of Simcha. One of the Yom the Rebbe spoke after Yom Kippur was the union of Simcha. It was in the middle of the war. So the Rebbe says, how could there be Simcha when we know that there are Yidden that are fighting a war in a certain a place in the world? We come and gain counsel. So the Rebbe answers that it's a Zayar. That the Zayar says, Tochazi, come and see. You come and see when a person shows an image of a sad image, depression, so Melmaila, they show him a depression reaction. And that's a reaction of depression. So as a person shows a joyous face, so Melmaila also, there's Simcha that comes Melmaila. So the Rebbe says, therefore, when Yidden will be the Simcha, it will bring down Hamshacha, a positive Hamshacha from above. Now with this actually, the Rebbe answers a question a few months later in the Yitziskisel Farbrengen. That it was B'shas the Alter Rebbe was interrogated in prison, and they asked him 22 questions, so he answered everything besides one. And that one was a controversial one, but again to the what it says in Tanya, the end of Perek Aleph, the difference between the nations, and the Alter Rebbe did not answer it, but instead he just smiled. So the Rebbe said they accepted it and they let him go. So the Rebbe says, hey, what did he accomplish? What did the interrogator understand? So the Rebbe says, B'shas a Yid shows a Simcha here, Simcha mamtik dinim, it sweetens negative things. The Mela, it's a Simcha that comes down Milmaila. The Mela, which the interrogator and his questions were already buckled. It didn't seem to bother him anymore because in the root it was already in his Bible. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe was exempt from answering the question. They didn't insist that he should answer it. So upon him, and this went even further yet. B'shas was Chalamei Tzukis that year, Tavshan Amidalet, and a group of Chassidim, a minyan, went over to the Rebbe with a pigeon for the Matzav in Eretz Yisrael. And they told the Rebbe that Matzav in Eretz Yisrael, the Muhammad, it went on for a few weeks. So the Rebbe told them, I find myself now in a Gnua of Simcha. Don't schlep me into it. And the Rebbe says, take the pigeon and go to the Eil yourself. In other words, the Rebbe says, I'm now in a matzav of Simcha. Don't schlep me into, don't drag me into this inyan, into Ragdolas. Which means the Rebbe was working with my Lamata, from above to below. Harchava. And this is basically the inyan of the Negia to the union of Simcha. So going on Benegia to the Rebbetzin, that the Rebbe asked that they should Farbrengen every day. It was Friday, it was the second day of Shana, the Rebbetzin didn't feel good. And she didn't come to shul, and that was when the chair burned. And she told someone, she said, you don't know what you have. When you get to the Rebbe, he says, "Ihr weißt nicht, was ihr vermocht." You don't know what you own. And the Rebbetzin continued, I'm not saying it as a mother, but as a fact. She told this to Rabbi Yunik, Rabbi Yunik. It was Friday night, The Rebbetzin went retired for the evening, and the next morning the Rebbetzin had a stroke. It was 5 in the morning. My father was the physician in Beis Harav for 40 years, and he got a call 5 in the morning. It was a mabel outside. It was mamish fluching. It was dark. My father grabbed the bag and he ran. He found out it was a stroke. The attendant called up. The Rebbetzin had an attendant to help in the house, and after that, it seemed like she was starting to come out of it. Although usually they're being watched 24 hours or 48 hours over here, it seems, and to the extent that she herself said then, she says, "Ich weiß nicht, was mit mir ist. I don't know what happened to me." The Rebbe came about 9 o'clock after 9. The Rebbe would come every day in the week. So I don't know if it was a messenger was sent to the Rebbe's house, but the Rebbetzin didn't make it to open the door, and the person felt he's disturbing the Rebbe, so maybe he left. But she saw from the window, she understood something was happening. It was then that the Rebbe saw what was going on, and the Rebbe told my father that he should come every few hours, and he should report back. So he should come, President Kingston, report back on 770. So it was right before davening, the Rebbe called over the secretary, and every few hours, my father was monitoring and giving over to the Rebbe what's going on. At the Farbrengen, the Rebbe Farbrengen, Sichers and a Maimer, very deep Maimer Dafka, and my father went over to report, to update, and the matzah was quiet, relatively stable. And my father took a course and said L'chaim. He didn't know the Rebbetzins mother's name. He turned to the Zikri Hasidim, they didn't know either. So he announced Chana Bas, so the Rebbe filled in Rochel. Said L'chaim. A while later, things started to go downhill, and when Rabbi Yunik realized what was going on, he didn't want to tell the Rebbe directly, so he came to 770, he told the Rebbe that his mother wants to see him. So the Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen, davened Mincha. After Mincha, the Rebbe rushed out from his room, his coat, mamish, he's like putting on his coat while he's running out from 770, rushed up Kingston Avenue, and reached his mother's house. It was at 5 o'clock. It was then that it was decided, the Rebbe wanted 3 doctors to Paskin. It was decided that they need to go to the hospital. Hatzolah B'chal didn't exist then. It was 12 years before Hatzolah. And the Mela, what they did was they called an ambulance in the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital. Then it was Brooklyn Jewish, today it's called Interfaith. And the Rebbe went into the ambulance, my father went into the ambulance, and it was a shurpin. The Rebbe wanted someone that the Rebbe knew. My father said they offered the Rebbe the passenger seat in the front. The Rebbe says he wants to sit with his mother in the back. And he sat with his mother holding her hand, he can feel comfortable. The Rebbe wasn't already recognizing people then. And they worked on her in the hospital, and about 6:45, the idea came that she was nifter. The Rebbe asked if they did certain procedures, certain massages, or they said they tried everything. And after Shabbos, the Rebbe came back. The Rebbetzin, the Mita came back to the house, to President Street. And the Rebbe didn't eat that Shabbos. So there was someone that brought the Rebbe food with a nityid. He brought the Rebbe, Rabbi Sasank, and brought the Rebbe food. And he told the Rebbe that you have to eat, you didn't eat. So the Rebbe asked him, you have slicha for Rabbonis? The Rebbe didn't eat that Shabbos, because he would go home after Shabbos and hear the Rebbe read here. Al Kaponim, when the Rebbe came home, the Rebbe asked Rav Zalman Duchman that he should make sure that the svarim of his father that are in his mother's house should be packed away, should be taken to his house. The Rebbe says, I see already that I have to be very cautious that svarim should not be taken from here. These were the writings of his father.
So whose house?
Zalman Duchman. Zalman Duchman said if Rabbi Yunik takes achrayas, responsibility, then he'll do it. Rabbi Yunik took achrayas in a little briefcase, they took it to the Rebbe's house. This was that. The Rebbe sat Shiva for 3 days, till Yom Kippur. Many, I remember as a Talmud in Yeshiva, Lubavitch Yeshiva, All the classes came to be Menachem Mobile. The Rebbe was sitting on the box or something. We all came around the Rebbe, and we saw Rabbanim sitting around the Rebbe. Admurim, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik came, the Sapler Rebbe came, the Weisenberger came, Rabbi Hutner came. See, yeah, Rabbi Yelarein, das war in Arena damals. Das auf Hey, in Arena. Ich bin halt. He came from Williamsburg. The Rebbe came to him, the Dalit, to be Menachem Mobile, him, or a sister or something. So he paid a visit. Yeah, Sigman ruhig, bis Chavzayim, für Muhammad. Vier Wege, bestak ich dir das but this wasn't so radical. With them, it really got out. Aber Kapolim he came. The Rebbe was looking for a heter, and he had to the table and the Fall, the Kippur. So I was answering and the Teres Menachem like this here. After the conclude with the Sinyan, after the Shiva, after Yom Kippur, the Rebbe davened for the Yom 11 months. 11 months. Those years, it wasn't like a minyan of hundreds of people. You had a minyan of the Bacher in the Lincoln 77. The Rebbe Farbrengen every Shabbos throughout the year. Every Shabbos of Farbrengen. And then the Rebbe introduced to the world the gift of Rashi Sichas. The Rebbe's explanations of Rashi began Parsha Neach Tavshin Chafei. So the Mela, basically, this is when it started, and the Rebbe continued for 22 years. And obviously, the whole from this is the overview B'negea to the Rebbetzin. The Rebbe even published. This is something that's not so known, but some people were gribbling and they found it. Every month, on the 6th of the month, the Rebbe published a Maimer. Vov Cheshvan, Vov Kislev, Vov Tevis, Vov Shvat. Every 6th of the month, the Rebbe, on that day, the Rebbe published something. There's a list of them. I think somebody printed a shura and he put all these inyanim together. It's very interesting. The whole issue of the different things. When the Rebbe finished Kaddish, was the 5th of the Yortzar of Arizal. The Rebbe then Farbrengen. You couldn't drink wine in 9 days. The Rebbe, they used mashke. The Rebbe said a seal, continued from Bistamos, and that was basically every year the Rebbe Farbrengen Vav Tishrei. The Rebbe founded a new tzedakah fund called Keren Chana, a fund to help Jewish girls with Jewish education. And the Rebbe would make a siyum at the Farbrengen and would speak about the schus and the achraya, responsibility of Jewish women, the shei of Bnei Yisrael. Chaim, the Rebbe says, helping it should be Vakitzu B'Ramen, the Sheikh Miyafo, you can say Chaim. Die was Nikolaev liegen, ik heb er nog geen gezien, ja. Ze liegen van Nikolaev. Nou, dat is goed. Small betalen is niet goed. Je denkt als ze daar liegen, ja, I mentioned earlier that my father would visit the Rebbetzin many times, the Rebbetzin Chana. There were times that I remember once I picked up the phone and the Rebbetzin Chana was on the phone. She asked if I could take a message. I said, yeah, you already taught as children that calling God for my father. I took a message. So upon him, there were the occasions that my father had when he met the Rebbetzin. He told me a few customs that the Rebbetzin had. And they're not some customs, this is like a psicha, like a whole perspective on life. One of the inyanim when he gave to Rebbetzin was that Mitzvah Shabbos, she would put on all the lights in the house. She would turn on the lights in the house, all the lights. The answer was, in the Avdollah we say like Hudim Eisoira. And when we think about it, it's not like Hudim Eisoira. But B'Shas Ma'aser, by her, it was like after Havdalah, it was to begin the week with the Inyan of light. Derech, like we see B'Negir Ma'aser Bereishis, that the creation of the world was Yehi Eir. It was the Inyan, first Inyan was Yehi Eir. And as the Rebbe explains what is the Inyan of Yehi Eir, this shows that the Tachlis, the whole goal and aim of the whole chain of creation and of all worlds is the Inyan of Eir, the Inyan of Gilur, revelation. Revealing godliness in world. And the Mela, this is Benegir to Sai Benegir to Yaram of Teda, which is Eira Zuteda, and in addition to that, the union of Geplichkeit. And we think about it, it's also in a psychological way, it is also like that. When a person begins with a positive feeling, beginning of the week, which every week is again the creation of the world, Ma'aser Bereishis. So the Mela then, it is beginning on a positive note. As we see also an interesting deal that Rebbe's Medayik in the Sicha, which the Rebbe said 70 years ago. Parsha Nitzovim, Tovshin Yud Aleph. The Rebbe says over there, Gilu Beroda, rejoice with trembling. That's the translation of the pasuk in Tilim. In Tilim, it's in chapter 2. Gilu Beroda, the Inyan of rejoicing, we rejoice, we tremble. So the Rebbe says, there's two ways of looking at it. There's one way is, there's the Inyan of Rosh Hashanah, so the Rebbe says, the Aveda of Rosh Hashanah has to be with Simcha. The Rebbe says, he has to evaluate himself where he is in the world. So the Rebbe says, this is Elul. When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, it starts a new Aveda of Simcha, especially as the Friedrich Rebbe says, Achtoras HaMelech, anointing the Eibush as a king, it has to be with joy. And the Rebbe says, therefore, Gilu, the first thing is rejoicing, because this is what this is said when it gets to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the time of rejoicing, but it's hidden, concealed with the trembling. So the Rebbe says, if we start with the trembling, the male person will feel very down. Al-Derech, like a poor person, doesn't even have to be reminded. As soon as he thinks about his situation, he begins crying bitterly. So the Rebbe says, therefore, it has to be Gilu. The first thing has to be the Inyan of Simcha. And the the union of Roda, Vigila Berada, the union of the trembling. But basically, the foundation, the key has to be the union of Gila, which Alderach says also been geared to the union of the union Chiyuvi, that the way that the Rebbe looked Toshit on every union. Alderach, like we see that the Shas was Tafshin Lamed Ches. The doctors were telling the Rebbe that he has to be very careful. If not, there is a 25% chance that it might come back. So the Rebbe says, but there's a 75% chance that it won't come back. Which means that the Rebbe was looking at the positive union. We find it also when you get to the union of the Tzemach Tzedek, that Tzemach Tzedek was Machadesh, the union of Trach Good V'Zayin Good. Think good, it will be good. And as the story goes, when you get to Tzemach Tzedek, that there was a Yid, that this Yid had a member of his family was not well, and he asked the Tzemach Tzedek what to do. Tzemach Tzedek says, it comes in Chasteda, you should dance with a very intense dance. And a few days later, the child got better and was cured. Which means basically the union of Trachgut and Zayngut, Atfila, the union of a positive way. Alderach, we find it also in a letter that the Rebbe wrote to physicians, a conference of physicians in 1955. This was a conference, which Adam Kodem Latzmei, a conference that my father made for religious physicians, how they should juggle halacha, getting together, discussing halacha and medicine. And the Rebbe wrote a letter to this conference in Hebrew and in English. And the Rebbe was discussing different things, but the introduction to the whole, in the beginning of the letter is the Yisod, that a person has to know, because you are treating a person. You need to focus not only on the physical aspect of the person, but the personality of the person. You need to know who to talk to, and you need to have the support of the person. And the Mela, when the person wants to get well, like the Rebbe writes on the Yem, the Zayin Sivan, that the tikva, bitochen, the hope, and the feeling secure that he'll get well. That alone is part of the cure. So the Rebbe says, 1955, the Rebbe is writing that this is helping in curing the person. The Rebbe once told a story that there was one that he avoided treating a problem that he had, and finally the family forced him to go to a podiatrist to check out his foot. So he says that he had a problem on the left foot. So he showed the doctor the right foot. The doctor gives a look at the foot, says everything's all right. He goes back home, he says, I was coming from the doctor, everything's all right. So the Rebbe says this is basically not really attending to the Inyan in a direct way. And this is Bechlal in everything. But the Rebbe, there was some by dollars. Somebody once came by dollars, and they told the Rebbe, this person feels pain and he's crying the whole day. The Rebbe says, what does he have to cry a whole day? He can laugh a whole day. Which wasn't stama verbal. It was basically because through the inyan of simcha, he can break through all the inyanim, which is accomplished after through simcha. So Akoponim, and as mentioned earlier, that even the Rosh Hashanah, it's Gilu, you start with joy, and then Re'oda is already, he goes into Re'oda. Over the Peyel, the Re'oda is just a cover, but the foundation is the Inyan of Gilu, the Inyan of Simcha. This is basically that with the minhag that the Rebbetzin had to open up all the lights in the house, which is basically positive. And we see also by the Anhog of the Rebbetzin, when she would meet a person, she would focus on the positive, and she would speak with the person, and she tried not to say anything that can hurt that person. Maisa with a certain child in the building that lived in the same building, and he went to public school, and the Rebbetzin did not want to discuss it with him because she knew that it will hurt him. So Mela, she was discussing everything around, but not that. Let's have the sensitivity that the Rebbetzin had. The Rebbetzin would listen to what's happening, and different comments that the Rebbetzin made. In the building of the Rebbetzin lived the Friedman family. Avremo Fried lived there, was around 4 or 5 years old. Upon him, he would be singing already. So sometimes he would sing while the Rebbe is coming to visit, and the Rebbe, he would live on a higher floor, and the Rebbe would motion with the hand to him on the higher floor. The Rebbe once gave him a gift, a coin, which in those years a quarter was not a small mabea, and this was a gift, basically for singing the chulum. And there were people that were close to the Rebbe, and they saw the way that the Rebbe prepared. When the Rebbe was coming, she would sometimes stay outside, wait for the Rebbe to come. And there were times that she felt that he should have his own key. The Rebbe wanted his own key not to bother his mother, but also to open the door from outside. She wanted that the Rebbe have some exercise. So Mela, that he should himself open up the door. So it shows Pashat Begashmi, the Rebbe was Buddhist. The Rebbe would from time to time, the Rebbe would sometimes stop in the grocery or whatever, or send someone, and he would deliver the milk or anything that the Rebbe needed as a before Shabbos. It was Pashat. There was one time that a bacher came for Shachmanis, and then the Rebbe gave him cake. And he made a bracha with the cake, and boom, the Rebbe comes, and this bacher hides away, and the Rebbe calls him out, and the Rebbe says, "Did you make a bracha achrein?" He forgot, or he ran out. He saw the Rebbe, so the Rebbe gave him a siddur and told him, "Sit down and make the bracha achrein." It was a young bacher. I heard it from him, and yesterday I heard the story again. So upon him, there were people that would come and say l'chaim with the Rebbetzin, people that knew the Rebbetzin. In the Chavches Tevis, the day of Yor Yom Meledis, they would come and say l'chaim, the Par Meledis with them. For a time, they figured that the Meledis was Chavei Tishrei. I don't know where it came from, and it was even printed in a Sefer. And later they found out that it was the 28th of Tevis. And it was once a Maaseh when the Tavshin Lametes, the Rebbetzin was then entering her 100th year. Lametes, Tavshin Mem, she was born Tafresh Mem. It was Parsha Ba'ira. The Rebbe is speaking a Sicha, a Rasha Sicha, which speaks about who Aaron and Moshe, who Moshe Aaron. And the Rebbe says, the Rasha explains that they're equal, al derech, like a father and a mother. Sometimes there's a maila, the kibbutz, respecting the father, and fearing the mother, Yishemi Bavitero. So the Rebbe says, Melamed Sheshniyam Shovim. This is the Rasha that I better pick for that Shabbos Farbrengen. Sometimes everything was the deal, but it's interesting. That was the Rasha, and that was the Yemeledes. That night, Mitzvah Shabbos was the Rebbe's and Yemeledes. And then, towards the end of the Farbrengen, they started to sing the Rebbe's father's nigun, and the Rebbe Mamas jumped up down and Pasha danced by that nigun. Got up, student dance by that nigun. We found out later, we didn't have what was going on. It seemed to be an ordinary Shabbos. So Rabbi Yunik, who was close with the Rebbetzin, said, tonight is the Yemeledes Shnas HaMe'ah, the Rebbetzin. Me'ah Bam Rebbe is given a very special, they said, the whole Farbrengen was like different format than usual. Akaponim, the Nekudi is that Pesach Galecha Yoir, that she would begin the week, as mentioned, she would open up all the lights. The same way that it's Bayis is the union of a Bayis, the same thing is B'chachmi Yivna Bayis, like the Rebbe says Bayis goes on the world. That the same thing is also in the world, that the world was created, Yehi Eir was the first one, and the Tachlis, although the Rebbe says, what's the Tachlis? There's no Mama's creation, it just reveals what we can't see otherwise. So the Rebbe says that this shows that the Tachlis of the whole world is, the creation of the world is to bring the union of light. So the Rebbe is to help him, we should have Eira, V'simcha, V'sasa, Chai. Okay, Vashem Nikolai is leaving. Then, after the Shiva, the Rebbe approached my father and asked him, he wants to pay him, he wants to know how much to pay him, because it was a whole Shabbos back and forth. My father went to the house, went to 770. My father didn't want any money. But the Rebbe said in Sanhedrin also, the Rabbanim would get paid, save for him. So my father said, he's not managing. He said, look, Misarvim with cotton, Misarvim with gold. Turn down a small person, not a big person. So He took the money and he sent it back to Merkez. Sent it back to the Meisters. So Al basically, by the Rebbe, there was a Indian of paying. And paying, especially when you get to the Fuah. There was a story in Tavshan Lamed Ches, when the Rebbe, after the Rebbe recovered, it was Pesach when the Rebbe paid the doctors. The doctors that treated the Rebbe, the Rebbe asked they should come for matzah. The Rebbe asked the Maskiru should walk out. And there were a few doctors. My father, there's Dr. Richter, the Feldman, a few doctors and some from out of town that they probably the Rebbe sent it to them. So upon him, the Rebbe gave them a matzah and the Rebbe gave them an envelope. And Dr. Richter, he's a cousin with the Kunin family. So he said to the Rebbe, he says, I hope we're not going to lose the schus of treating the Rebbe by getting paid. So the Rebbe said, Asya the Mogin Shabya. A doctor doesn't take any money, is not worth anything. So you have to push it. This is a union that's Negeya, your Matthias as a doctor. So this is what I heard from my father when he went out. I made my time. From then on, the Rebbe gave matzah. Already all the years, my father would get a matzah, and the Rebbe would tell him, it's Michoel of Amunah and Michoel of Refuah. Michoel of Amunah and Refuah. Faith and remedy, healing. Now, there were times that there was one time the Rebbe told me to come the second night again. The second night was in. My father asked the Rebbe, it says, the first day is Amunah, the second was Refuah, that maybe that's the deal of the second night. So the Rebbe said, that's and both nights are both. And the vice is what's more mudgish. The first night is Refuah, the second night. First is Amunah, the second is Refuah. Cholei from this was basically connected with the paying that by the Rebbe he never wanted that this was a Yachad himself, together with that, the Rebbe Michoel did not want that people should know what's going on by his health, by the Rebbe's health. The Rebbe once said that the Negeya not to know about other things, especially the Rebbe's halachas kama v'kama b'negeya to his health. When they wanted a certain thing in Lamed Ches. My father once told me that he visited the Rebbe, the President Street. Rebbetzin was called to the house direct. So when he visited the Rebbe, the Rebbe was then going back to 770. So the Rebbe asked him, my father should not come back at the same time. Men soll nicht wissen, als kommt von mir. They shouldn't know you're coming from me. The Brios was later, after Lamed Ches and after Nun Beis, that's when people found out. In Yonim, they were taking place in Little Mamish and the Chofs. Some were even serious in Yonim, and came and got lost. 40 years, nobody knew anything. Dalet to Lamed Ches. Al Kaponim, my father Michoel didn't speak. Even in the house, that he never spoke. But when people were walking the street, and I asked him, he confirmed it. There was a certain issue in terms of Dalet. Al Kaponim, but these were in Yonim, was Sanziti geblieben. Vergessen, in fact, the Rebbe didn't want the king as already. When I get to the Rebbetzin, there was also another Indian that was by the Rebbetzin of Chushin Gina. That Nigina, Pashut Nigunim. I heard tonight, I don't know what the Nigin is, and since Mamash from the Babich and Nigunim, and Al-Kaponim, so young man went over to me, he said to me tonight, he says that the Rebbetzin once met a girl, a teenager, and she knew her from Parkingen. So maybe she says, I remember that I heard a nigun that you were singing then, and I liked very much the nigun. Do you remember you sang the nigun? Could you sing the nigun for me? And they both started to sing the nigun as a president in Kingston. A nigun which was Akaponim, but that was Rebbetzin Chana. I was the Rebbetzin Chana. The Aldenach Zeh is given was Fastei Topshin Yutes, and late 58, and the Rebbetzin was standing. It was standing on the corner of President Kingston, and the conversation was that Simchas Torah was the all-nighter, as they call it in today's English. So the Rebbe would Farbrengen before Hakafas. That's the young. for our office, and then there would be a break. And the break would be about an hour. Then would be our office 1 o'clock. Then the office would go till about 3:30. And I feel earlier, longer. The council came, the Israeli council came the second day, because it was after Yom Tov. And then some remained dancing, some went home. So we sat down to eat the soup. I remember one time I looked at the clock, 3:30 a.m. 3:30 a.m. we're eating the Suda from the earlier evening, because we went Talucha, everybody went Talucha, so we were in Flatbush. We come back from Talucha, we came to 770, so Farbrengen, who's going to think about eating? The Noche, so everybody went into the Farbrengen position. After the Farbrengen, they had the place for our coffers. So they levited. I remember some people passed out, because it was a whole evening, and it wasn't like today. You got Mahotsan Atrok, it was eingesund noch a Markowitz at Meisters, there was nothing. Either you had a choice to drink up some bissel Wasser, or the 96 mit a paar crackers. That's what you get. Mele was, so the Pale, one time my wife invited someone for a Suda, a journalist. She said, what time is the meal? 3 a.m. She's wondering what does I'm, so she thought we made a mistake. AM has to be PM. So she came PM and we were in 770, by the Rebbe, the morning office. So it was a different channel of the cloud. So it was after the Rebbe finished our office, 3:30, the Rebbe went up to eat the Suda upstairs. The Rebbe would eat all the Yom Tov Sudas on the second floor till about 50 years ago. Last year was 50 years since the Rebbe stopped, when the Rebbe's Muhammadina was nifter. So after the Suda upstairs, the Rebbe would come down. In the earlier years, the Rebbe would would make sure the Bachim have a coffee. Mamish in the first years, everyone said, lady is the Rebbe Torah Nigen, the new Nigen. The Rebbe in Tafshin Tazayin, and now the Rebbe would teach a Nigen. Then the Rebbe would distribute mashke for all those that took upon themselves to increase Chassidus, study Chassidus. And people would form a line, and the Rebbe would listen how they're singing the Nigen. The Menagnim were there. They would, if the Nigen was a Russian Nigen, a Nigen was Stab Yapito, the Rebbe asked Zalman Lipsker, who's in Philadelphia. The Rebbe says, I can't have Nigen, I can't have Russisch, so you should go up front to chap the Nigen. Because I remember as kids, it was very hard to chap Stab Yapito. The words, we don't even know what the words are. There was Shasmaisa at that time. So Kaponim, so the Mela was an all-nighter. And the Mela, and there were times that the Rebbe would ask, are you taking a achlota? Are you making a resolution to increase in Chassidus? And the person says he has to think. Standing a line, the Rebbe is waiting at him, he has to think. So the Rebbe says, I have to prepare for davening today. 6 in the morning, the Rebbe says, I have to break from davening Shabbos, which was 10 a.m. The Rebbe came into Shabbos 10 a.m. sharp. How many people were there? I forgot how many I counted, and it wasn't like today, and it was a third of the shul. It was a third of the shul of today. And it was a small Elam. Elam Pashas, not everybody was able to get back on their feet 10 o'clock. They get trunken, they get talucha, long enough. The Rebbetzin was standing about 11, 12 o'clock, standing on Kingston at President, and she meets Rav Nachum Kaplan, Ryan Gesund, and she asks him, what liegen did the Rebbe teach yesterday? She knew the Nigunim, because some of the Nigunim the Rebbe heard from his mother. And the uncle and the Zayda, they were Menagnim. So he said, ich weiß nicht welchen liegen, but the Rebbe cried very much. The liegen was Shamil. Shamil, and the Rebbe cried very much, because the Rebbe was talking about the union of Shamil is that was a certain general. When the Mela, they thought he was fighting against the Russians, and the Mela, then they arrested him, they put him into prison. They fooled him. They deceived him, saying that they're going to make peace with him. They arrested him, and he's thinking, here he was on the high hills, mountains, everything, and here he's sitting in prison. So the Rebbe said, Chassidim took the Nigen, and they interpreted it in Avodas Hashem, that the Neshama is coming from high heights. comes down here into prison, and then he's thinking what's going to be, but the end will be, it will work out. So the Rebbe singing the niggin and describing the story and telling the story, the Rebbe was crying, so it was very hard to have the niggin. So when the Rebbetzin heard that the Rebbe cried, so she Lamed gave me 770. Let's go to 770. So she walked together with the Bacher, a Kaplan. She was 13 years old. She walked to 770. 770 then did not have a roof yet over the shore. It was a canvas. They took Tavshin Chof to this Thomas time, 1960. The mainland was comes to 770. See the Rebbetzin is here. She's standing by the men's shul. So they immediately made a path, opened up a path all the way to the Rebbe. The Rebbe saw the Rebbetzin, he said, with Yontif, and she now with Yontif, Yatz commission gehen ahead. Now we can go home. This was the union of seeing her son. So Akaponim, the Nigunim, that which ones the Rebbe didn't really specify, but it was known that certain Nigunim, the Rebbe Pasha at home. He heard it from his mother that was not given over the family, but Janovsky. Especially also that there's also a diuk, they say, to the Beinani. I don't know exactly what prat, but the Beinani, that they sing it also in a special way, which not everybody sings like that. And the Rebbe was Madai enough that he sing it the way that he was Makabel with the family. The whole Leifim, the first time that the Rebbe began speaking B'Negiah to the Rebbetzin was and the pulas of the Rebbetzin B'Negiah B'Ksavim, the writings of his father, was in Tavshin Chof 1960. It was Parsha B'Shalach. The Rebbe then revealed that there was a certain activity that took place in regards to Svarim coming out from Russia, came out through Tishrei, different agents, B'Ksavim from his father. And this was something that the Rebbe then first time spoke about it in public. Then years went by. The Rebbe mentioned it, but it wasn't like any new big development. Then came Tavshin Chof Ches. Tavshin Chof Ches, the Rebbe spoke about the Rishima that his father wrote, that he was in 5 exiles, Ali, Levi Yitzchak, Ezel Berochel, and the Rebbe is Mevayer al Pechsidus the Inyan Avedis Hashem in the Farbrengen of Chof Ches. Tavshin Chof Ches, the Rebbe started to teach Igeres HaTshuva. Same way that the Rebbe taught Rashi every Shabbos Farbrengen, the Rebbe taught a few lines from Igeres HaTshuva. The Rebbe had Igeres HaTshuva in the back of his siddur. It was printed with Akdosha for his mother. And the Rebbe, every Shabbos Farbrengen, given a portion of Igeres HaTshuva, the Rebbe went through the whole Igeres HaTshuva. Today, in Rabbi Chitik's Sefer, Liquid Perushim Antanya, you have the Burim from the Rebbe. Here, the Rebbe is with Daik in your the Rebbe shows to Usim Bazain Dakudah, Pashikin Pintalachen and Dats, Meshakasa Be'ezra, Dabavus Sicha, Perikidala. The Rav Misleach, Meshakasa Be'ezra. But the Rebbe says there's no Pasik for Rav Misleach in Ezra. The Rebbe says the Pintala, the Dat has to be in a different place. So it's like a whole, the Rebbe went through, sifted through the whole Igeres HaTshuva. Tavshin Lamed, a new revelation. The Rebbe's father's commentaries on Tanya are published. It's a thin booklet, but a booklet that it was a new thing, and it was two things. It was one, it's the Rebbe's father. It's the first thing that we hear from the Rebbe's father, first Torah, and second of all, the Gishmak, the way he was interpreting the Tanya, the way his insights, how he was elaborating on the Kabbalah. I remember that there was a few diukim that the Rebbe's father writes on Tanya. There's one diuk that he writes, I think it's in the first paragraph in Tanya, that the Rebbe writes, Madregas, and then he says, Mermayla, from all the levels, Madregas, and then he says, Bizlamata, safe called Dargin. So the Rebbe says, why does he start Madregas, which is Hebrew? And then he finishes with Aramaic Dargin. So the Rebbe's father explains, talk higher, it's in Kedusha, Madrega. Talk Lamata here is Dargin, it's Aramaic. It's a different Lashon, it's a Golos language. There's an Igeres HaTshuva, there's interesting diuk, Peirik Ches. Now the Rebbe says the Lashon there that the union of Tshuva and Kapara comes from Keser, which is higher than Chochmah. So he says twice L'mayla. L'mayla, Mayla, Mechochmah. So the Rebbe's father asked the question, why twice L'mayla? So So the answers, they're like a shmakadil, that there is Chochma Stimor, which is Chochma Shebekesed, and then there's the real inyan of Kesed, which is higher than Chochma Shebekesed. That's why he says Lamai Lamai. But the Reichkeit, it was like a whole new Gilui. I made it. I remember I took my hand, I couldn't close it. It was like really tempting. It was very geschmack. And the Rebbe started to then to start learning his father's Haoris on Tanya. He gave us a tshuva. Then, a year later, the Rebbe's father's commentaries on Zayar was published. Reish, Shmei, Vayikra, Bamidbar Goren, the Rebbe started to comment, elaborate on the Haoris. From then on, the next 17 years, every Shabbos Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke al Haor of his father on Zayar. And if it was the same parsha, and next year came and he had only one Haor, so the Rebbe would start again talking about it from a different angle, from a different aspect. There was always new in Yonim. So Akoponim, this was basically the Seder that they had the Sefer Haoras al Zayar on the table when the Rebbe came in Shabbos Farbrengen. Rabbi Chodeka would bring it later, Rabbi Yisrael Chodeka, the son would bring it, and the Rebbe would walk in only with the Siddur. The Chumash was there already before, the Rebbe's Chumash, Teiref Mima, and the other Svarim, but the Siddur was the only thing that the Rebbe came in holding the Siddur. Everything else was ready, the cup, the wine, the Zainus, and the final touch with the Kiddush, the Rebbe would dry the cuss, but otherwise the Rebbe didn't come in with all the Svarim. And but the Haoras al Zayar was that the Rebbe would open it, and then the Rebbe would put in a marker. After the Rebbe would ask questions, the Rebbe would put in a marker, and they would sing the Gunim and Nigun. The Rebbe says the Nigun is in order to chapsach, to see what they can come up with, what the Elam can come up with, and then the Rebbe would himself look weiter. It's interesting, Rabbi Michoel once mentioned a very interesting observation. He says, you look at the Rebbe at the Farbrengen, he is looking at the Rasha. He surely prepared the Rasha before. He says, the Rebbe once said, I didn't sleep all night, trying to understand the Rasha. The Rebbe says, the Mela, he surely understand, learned the Rasha and this gegribelt metals. And he's still looking, he's still delving into the Rasha. He says, it was interesting to see it, how a Yid who already prepared the Rasha, and we're talking about the Rebbe's mind and the Rebbe's knowledge, and von deswegen, kocht sich in them. He's looking in it and finding and learning it, even like he's learning it the first time. This was the same also with the Zayar. And there were times that the Rebbe would, there was one winter, that the Rebbe said he's not going to answer the questions, but the next week, the people that have answers should write in the answers in the Haoris. And there was one time, the Rebbe mentioned by Farbrengen, there was a girl who asked the Rebbe, she asked the Rebbe, how come the Rebbe didn't answer? So the Rebbe says, it bothers no one. Chutz di meidl. So the Rebbe gave her a bracha, mamash barabim, and mentioned she had a good shidduch. So Akoponim, so there was one time, interesting that her, the Rebbe shiti is that Rashi is, Rashi says, ein libasi lefarish al pshuti shal mikra, which means the literal meaning. So the Rebbe asked once a question. It says in the pasuk in Parsha Boy, "Leyachratz kalav l'sheni," that the dog didn't bark when he didn't went out of Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe says, what is Negeya? What's the haflah? What's the uniqueness that the dog didn't bark? What's this Negeya to Yitzias Mitzrayim? So the next week, many people answered different things. One person wrote a very practical thing, and the Rebbe said, "This is Pshuti Shal Mikra." What did he write? The nature is that when there's a full moon, the dogs bark. Going out of Mitzrayim was a full moon, because what is Afal Pikein leyachratz kalav l'sheni. So the Rebbe says, this is Pshuti Shal Mikra. This is Kipashat, Kipshute. I think it was Rabbi Irgun, the Sefer. That's when the Rebbe wanted to push it. If a person would write Lamdis, the Rebbe said the child, Ben Chamesh Lemikra, didn't learn it yet. He didn't get to Gemara yet. He didn't even get to Mishnah yet. Ben Chamesh Esrei. And Ben Chamesh Lemikra. Speaking about the union of Chumash, we see an interesting thing in that the Rebbe, this is what the Rebbe initiated in the year of Avelis, and from then on the Rebbe kept it that says Pashat L'Schus Imei, Harabonis, that he taught the Rasha, was Mevayir Rasha, on the Pasha. The first year, the Rebbe was Mevayir 2 Rashas, the first and the last one of the Pasha. The later years, the Rebbe just did one. And actually, even the next year, the Rebbe didn't want to continue. Because worry about certain Yonim and Gishtupt. The Yid, Zachar Lateiv, Rabbi Yosel Goldman, was very much Me'eder and Tzadikot in the Rasha. He once told the Rebbe, he says, ich habe Anoah von der Rashes. Ich habe Anoah von der Rashes. So the Rebbe says, ich habe Anoah von der Rashes. It's a beautiful Rashes. It was a geschmack, the Rebbe. And the Rebbe would send him out the note, a reference, what the Rashi he's going to speak on with that Farbrengen. And sometimes with questions. And sometimes the Rebbe would send Rabbi Michoel Seligson, Rabbi Waldman lived then on Crown Eskenectady. He would send him to Crown Eskenectady Shabbos morning as Oli began Bacharash. Because this year Pasha looked through all the Mefashim. The Rebbe mentions him by Farbrengen. In Tzav Chavtes, Tzav Chavtes, the Rebbe mentioned him after there was a certain incident, earlier Shabbos, and the Rebbe then says, Ayid, it's a Litchpitz Chabad, the Rebbe says Atomim, and it's negeya to him that the Rashi should continue. And in his chus, the Rebbe continued 20 years from Chavtes to Memches. Later, it wasn't mamish in the same format. The Rebbe didn't take out a chumash, he went on a different Seder Farbrengens after Chavei Shvat. Akoponim Yashleiman, I saw it also, the Rebbe say it, that interesting reflection from the Rasha Siches and the personality of the Rebbetzin. The Rasha Siches we saw by the Rebbe two extremes. On one hand, Ein Mikra Yetzem B'Dei Pshutei, the Pasuk B'Farish of the Pshutai Shal Mikra, the literal meaning of the Pasuk. On the other hand, you look at the Rasha, you look at the Rebbe's Biyurim, you look at the insights of the Rebbe, you see amkus, you see depth. Sometimes Chassidim were wondering, like, who's this Chomesh Lamika? Chomesh Lamika mit Azat Tiefkeit, as a little. But one of the two extremes. The same thing was also by the Rebbetzin. By the Rebbetzin, on one hand, the relationship that you had with everybody, with adults, with children, everyone according to their level. On the other hand, the depth, the way she conducted a conversation, the consideration for another person, the selection of what she decided to speak with that person, not to hurt the person. It was two extremes in the same time. Somebody said about today, since you have behind, that the Etzem, the Chomesh Lamikra, 5-year-old child, before he goes to Cheder, the first one that teaches him, but the mother also has something. So Leila, basically, this is the connection with the mother. That this is the contribution of introducing him to Chomesh Lamikra when you get to Rasha. By the Rebbetzin, we saw it in many inyanim, and this is one of the inyanim, that the extremes that was asked. The person looked, she was very social. Everybody would think, she was social, she was a people's person. On the other hand, everything was a chesma, who she spoke with. Certain people, she expressed when against certain people that were very broken, that it was a certain feeling, a certain zugetrogenkeit, and a certain consideration, a focus in a very intense way, feeling for another person. And the same thing also, a person came to the house, the Rebbetzin would give him something to eat, something to drink, give him a tip. Sometimes he would ask questions, and the Rebbe would, the living man, the Rebbe would then get the message, and would sometimes answer the question through his mother. And then the person would come the next time. So I said, one of the stories that if somebody would be delivering from his father's grocery, then he came the next time, and the Rebbetzin told him, this is what my son answered. So you ran verschiedene tomatoes, but basically, another example of the Rebbe's kibbud aim, an example, but this shows to what extreme. It was Yom Tov. Every Yom Tov of Shalosh Regalim, the Rebbe would immediately after davening, with his talus, he would walk with his mother to the entrance of 770. She came to davening, then she went up to her Mechatenesta, the Rebbe's Chamadina. Then she spoke with the Rebbe a few moments in the in the room, and then they would walk out together, and the Rebbe would watch how she's being walked home. She walked home with her attendant. He waited till she turned Kingston Avenue. I remember it like today. Many people standing right after Yom Tov davening. The Rebbe standing there watching, doesn't take his eyes off. She would stop, speak with people. The Rebbe is waiting all the time till Mama, she couldn't see her. There's another story that's called Benegir to Yom Kippur, an interesting story that Rabbi Yunik told, who was very close with the Rebbetzin. In fact, after the Shiva, the Rebbe gave him the air conditioner from the house. The Rebbe said that she'll be happy that you're using it. He writes it in his Yuman, in his Sipur. So upon him, so he says it was Erev Yom Kippur. The Rebbetzin changed over from the shoes to sneakers. So the question was what to do with the shoes. So he took it. He told the Rebbe that he has the shoes. The Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's mother asked that, if she can put it, you can keep it. She keep it in the room by the Rebbe. He asked where to put it. The Rebbe shows him on the table. On the table. He says on the table. The Rebbe says on the table. So upon him, this is the Indian of Kibbutz. Wholly from there were many, besides the visits every day, that was time and the energy. The Rebbe, it was like Levita, he never compromised. It was every day. Feeling in the middle of the Shiva, when he was sitting Shiva for his brother, which was 12 years earlier, he came in the middle of the Shiva to his mother. But in order that his mother should not see that he's wearing sneakers, he colored the sneakers black. She didn't recognize he's wearing sneakers. But since he was suspecting that she might see something, so he told Rabbi Yunik, I'll sit there for a while, and then you come in and you come in and you continue. And that's what happened. The plan was that the Rebbe spoke with her a while, and then Rabbi Yunik came and gave her over something, and the Rebbe says, I have to leave already. And I was even in the plan. That's how it worked. So basically, just to make sure she didn't feel any concern of anything. The Rebbe kept people away from her. People should not discuss anything about the brother. And this went on 12 years. The state said there's a shmur that the Rebbetzin alone knew already, but she didn't want to tell the Rebbe. So it was, the only question that I had all these years was that the Rebbe said Kaddish on the 13th of the year. He said Kaddish the Meshach her lifetime. He didn't daven for the Yom, Rav Zalman Duchman daven for the Yom. So I was making a Kaddish. Because the Rebbetzin was very particular. The Rebbetzin my father once told the Rebbetzin that the Rebbe said Kaddish this evening. So the Rebbetzin starts thinking. She says my father never told me what the date was. She remembered that it was a relative in the family. So she said, "If I guess nicht auf keinen." He doesn't forget about anyone. Every detail he has in his mind. This was in Rabbi Kaddish. The Rebbetzin didn't even focus on it, but the Rebbe had all these dates in mind. The Rebbe would say Kaddish a few times a year, at least 3-4 times besides the yard cycle. The consideration that he had for his mother, that the Rebbe, this I heard from my father, that the Rebbetzin asked the Rebbe, her son, why doesn't he go out, leave the city for fresh air? Frische Luft. So the Rebbe said, Nechten bin ich gewähnt for frische Luft. He was at the ale. So he was out in the field, there's a frische Luft, fresh air. This was the day before. This was basically, everything was like a positive note. The whole Eifem, it was later that the Biurim of the Rebbe on Pirush Rashi started to come out. And in fact, the Rebbe was Magia, the first few Farbrengens of Tavshin Chafei. The Rebbe Farbrengt every Shabbos. Till Parsha Vayeshev, the Rebbe edited the Sichas. And Monday, Tuesday, I remember as a buffer, Monday, Tuesday, the whole Farbrengen was already mailed to people. And you're talking about Ha'ores, footnotes, references, a blue kuntris, and the whole Farbrengen, week after week. But after that, the Manichem, the Chazim couldn't keep up with it, and it stopped. But you have them in the back of the Kutas Yichas Chaylik, there's Vov. Chelik, Chelik. You have the Sichas from Tishrei Chafei, the Farbrengen in the back. But then it was Mamash Agilut. The Rebbe was ready to be Magia all year. Tishrei Chafei was early time. The time people were sleeping at Farbrengen, and there was a time that there was one time that a certain person who came from a different schooner, and he pushed it. He was a rav in a city, in a shul, tzvei shul. He would walk from there. He was an older person. The Rebbe called Rav Shmuel Levitin. The Rebbe told Rav Shmuel Levitin that he's upset, sleeping by Farbrengen. The Rebbe once said, why is he upset? Because there's tailors that are chazed over from the Baal Shem Tov and all the Rabbeim, who mishlop by Farbrengen. It's a disrespect. So he tells the Rebbe that Yid is a elderly Yid, and he's from a different schooner. The Rebbe says, oh, but it's artist. It bothers me. So then he tells the Rebbe, and man the Yid has two shuls, and he's walking far, and Shabbos and Baruch. The Rebbe says, oh, but it's artist. The Rebbe didn't give him. Finally, he tells the Rebbe, Schlafen in Gan Eden is echepes. Sleeping in Gan Eden is also something. So the Rebbe says, if Schlafen in Gan Eden is epes, sicher to be up in Gan Eden. It's even better yet. This was the head that the Rebbe acknowledged. Schlafen in Gan Eden. But Rav Shmuel had a way how to put in a good word. So basically, this was the union that was happening a lot of faith. The Rebbe once spoke about the union of limud schus for those that are sleeping. And then, like we find by the Arizal, that the Bishas, the Arizal spoke, the Al-Shech would fall asleep. So the Rebbe says, why did he fall asleep? So the Arizal says, because he's neshama is from Elam Atrush. Not shaykh, Elam Asar. So he would sleep then. There was one by Farbrengen, like if somebody fell asleep, and the Rebbe Weiss is gehalten chesed how long, and after the person woke up, the Rebbe motioned with their hands. Farbrengen Bechlal, if a person wanted to be by Farbrengen, he had to either stand or to lie in the hay. Especially if the person made the chon, but he can count this as Nafatika. It was a young guy just went home for Kiddush, for Zeines, for Epis Fish, Epis was. And then they came back to Farbrengen, they were able to stand. And the Rebbe says, even by Farbrengen Gufa, it's not comfortable. The Rebbe says, we see the muscle. By the Rebbe, there were Farbrengens that were in halls. Farbrengens were in rented halls for the evening, 3 times a year. It's Kislev, Yitzvat, and Purim. The reason, the Bishtam is not, because the 3 times a year were basically because upstairs was too small, downstairs was no roof, it was a cold weather, so the Mela they would rent a hall. And the halls that they rented were all kinds of halls. North Street, Eastern Parkway, Franklin, past Linden, Rutland, and Albany. It's even all sort of halls. That's why I said after Linden. I never mentioned it. And where the Beis Rivka was, the old Beis Rivka. And upon him, the Rebbe then, it was so the Rebbe would Farbrengen then, and the Elam would travel. Either they walked there, or had cars, public transportation. It was about within 10-minute drive from the schooner. Did you think so?
Sure.
Yeah. So upon him, the Rebbe would drive there, and you look at the pictures, you see it's not 770. It's a stage with a ganze doors with the curtains, and there's actually one place they rented. I think it was North Street, Eastern Parkway. That was the famous Farbrengen Purim Tesvov. And after the Farbrengen, the next day, the whole said that we can't rent it out again. The downstairs was a liquor store. Don't give us. He dancing. He started to dance at the vibration that the bottles fell off the shelves. So I told him, next time, find yourself, it's a different hall. I says that this could be the Hasbro, why also they were constantly changing, because there are a whole bunch of halls. The hall was very comfortable. So there was usually, the Rebbe would not Farbrengen after a Yom the Pagre in those years. In those years, it was only the Tzvat Marshal, and the next one was Shabbos Mevorach. Other. Later years, the Rebbe started to have the Shabbos after, the Shabbos before, Chofs, the Lamets, even more yet. It started more often. Tafshin Yudalet, B'Shalach, a few days after Yitzvat, the Rebbe Farbrengen. So the Rebbe says, what's the reason for the Farbrengen? So the Rebbe says, in the hall, everybody was sitting so comfortably. The Meiler, the Rebbe says, we couldn't talk in Yonim that we discussed by Chassidische Farbrengen. Ashenken do, the Rebbe says, Mishtupzech, everybody's pushing, the Turkit, the Rebbe says, here is the place where we can talk about it.
That's diplomatic.
So this was that's a given, the Rebbe spoke there about Yud Shvat, the Rebbe cried then, it was 4 years after Yud Shvat. The Rebbe Geredam was starting Yud Shvat. The whole Eifen, this was basically the Farbrengens. The Spechter, it started already, that the Rebbe started to Farbrengen the Shabbos after. The Rebbe would get letters, questions that people asked. The Rebbe would answer the questions of Farbrengen. The mazel is that the Rebbe didn't point with the finger, and the Rebbe never mentioned names. But sometimes there were people who feel very uncomfortable because the Rebbe would discuss a person's question, and then the Rebbe would say, the person asked a question, when he get a certain Gemara that we just concluded, a seal. And the Rebbe says, from dem Schreiben sieht man, als nicht ungem verstehen, was der Rebbe. From the writing, you can see he didn't even begin understanding the way the Rebbe says sometimes you're trying to make from a small thing a big thing, you spalt nachor, like to find something very unique, and when you're not looking on the surface itself. The Rebbe was the way people approach, the way people understand Farbrengen, Rabbi Michoel was very particular that the way to understand something, the way he expected that Chassidim will understand something. And this is basically in the Giluyim, the Yonim that the Rebbe gave. Alberos that the Rebbe would answer questions at Farbrengen. Questions that people wrote in the middle of the week. So although the Rebbe did not answer by the Farbrengen in the middle of the week, the Rebbe answered Shabbos. The reason was because this was something was negea to the public. It was negea to the public. The others might also have the question, but maybe they have an explanation. Maisa Shahoya, personal Maisa that I had in the 70s, I was in a shul. I'm telling the story just to show how much the Rebbe was involved in it, in the answer, and then later even, which I didn't even expect, the Rebbe spoke about it in public. It was a certain basic question. I was in the shul, it was then by Reuben Deitch's shul, and there were Beltische Yidden there. When it was Tavshin Lamed Vav 1976, it was Parsha Kedeshim, Shabbos Kedeshim, the Rebbe Farbrengen, and then we came with Chazal to Farbrengen. In the middle of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe mentioned, make for me a migdash, a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them. And then the Rebbe continues, it doesn't say in it, it says in them, amongst them, which means amongst all, amongst every Yid. Comes over this Yid to me, and he says, where's this Razal? Mentioned Razal. I told him that the Rebbe writes in Haora that at that point, Leisato, it is known to be in the Shalom. In other words, nothing more, nothing earlier. So he says to me, if it's the Shalom, why is it mentioned Razal? Why is it called Razal? I didn't do anything with it 2 years. Tafshin Lamed Ches, there were other things that came up, and it was time, that time, so I wrote in this question. So the Rebbe answered, Ki chayev adam leimar b'loshen rabbi admur azokim v'kutetera reish parsha nasi v'kama mekevas. A person is obligated to say in the lashon of his Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe uses the lashon azal. The reish parsha nasi v'kama mekevas. And the interesting part, all of the kutetera till parsha nasi, you will not find that phrase omru azal. You'll find the word of another omru azal. That's almost the Rebbe's medayah. Till Pasha Nasi. This was the end of the year. I was a Bacher then. So Bacher didn't tell me, why don't you push weiter? Why don't you ask, how come the Alter Rebbe uses Lashon Hazal? You have to do on your own also. You can't just stam schicken brief. It came to thought, this is one for us, that the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchos Talmud Torah, I think it's Vedic base, I think the first halacha. They're all the Rishonim Achreinim today have a din of Dvar Mishnah. Have a din of a Mishnah, which means Razal. The Mela, the Shalah is also included. That's what I derive from. The Shalah is also included. So the Rebbe writes, Ubefrat, that the Magen Avraham begins his commentary on Shulchan Aruch with a word from the Shalah. And then the Rebbe points to Hilchos Tamatera is Varidvarav B'teikav the Dvar Mishnah. The Mela, his words are like a Dvar Mishnah. The Mela, when the Shalah says, the Shalah says, B'seichel v'nemer al b'seicham, he's a Dvar Mishnah, he's Maimer Azel. I never met that kid again. For him, he was very easy. But upon him, Sarah became in the world. Das ich beim Beisivi. 10 days later, Lamadches, we had Farbrengen with Shabbos. That's the only Farbrengens that year and the next year that the Rebbe spoke Rasha Sichas and are recorded. Otherwise, they're all Shabbos Farbrengens. Not that the Rebbe was so excited about the Mitzvah Shabbos Farbrengens. They would always start with a little line that it's at Sibas Sheines and Mishunes were Farbrengen Mitzvah Shabbos. It was not. The Rebbe once told one of the doctors, Dr. Land, I think he was just left a few months ago. He's the teacher of Dr. Weiss. The Rebbe told him, when he asked the Rebbe, why is the Rebbe so against, he's opposed to Farbrengen Mitzvah Shabbos. He wanted to get back to the Shabbos Farbrengens. So the Rebbe told him, Shabbos is a holy day. When I come down to Chassidim, I elevate them, they elevate me. And the Mela, this all comes from the Shabbos. That's given the Rebbe came back to the old Seder, the original Seder, which was to Farbrengen on Shabbos. Okay, so Lamed Ches was still Mitzvah Shabbos. The Rebbe would start the Farbrengen, Sicher. The Rebbe starts the Farbrengen, it's Yudbei Sicher, it's the end of the Tashlumim from Chag HaShavuos. And the Mela, the Shaila is what kind of Tashlumim? So the Rebbe says the Tashlumim of the Karbanis. How the Karbanis come in now? So the Rebbe says, not in it, but in them. The Rebbe says, Mezucht of the Mocker for it. So the Rebbe says there's two biyurim. One biyur, the Rebbe mentions the Hilchos Talmud. The second biyur, the Rebbe says, is a medrash that didn't get to us. But the Rebbe says the second reason, the second answer, the Rebbe says, is not mistaber. What's the chabda? It's a very interesting chabda. If it's a medrash that didn't get to us, then the shalah would refer to it as Razal. It's before the shalah. The Mela, it's understood that it starts from the shalah. So the Rebbe says, the Mela, it's mistaber, the first answer. And then the Rebbe says, Al kan amaymer amuzger benegir tzakama v'kama v'sam gifretes. This is like the Rebbe says, in parentheses, you get from many the rest. Then the Rebbe continues the Farbrengen. So Akoponim, this is a very Yisaidistic inyan, because V'seichel v'nemer ela b'seicham, this is something that's mentioned in many Maimorim. People ask questions, and you meet a Velten Shayid, he asks a question, Vida Zarazal. In fact, in Akriya Vakdusha, the question was asked. And who's the Mareches, who's the editor? The Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes, Nimtza, that's how the Rebbe said then, Nimtza be'echad ma'medrashim v'ko eis yef shalemotzi. It's found in one of the Medrashim, but in the present we can't find it. The Chayile was the Rebbe's Mareches, unless somebody else wrote it. The Cholei from the Nekude is that on one hand there's the union of the Amkus, there's the union of Pashtus. There's simplicity, on the other hand there's also the depth. And Alderech, like Chassidus explains, that in order to explain something, a person has the two extremes. The deeper that he understands a concept, the lower he can bring it down. As we find it by Shlomo Melech. Shlomo Melech needed 3,000 parables to relate to a person that's 3,000 levels lower than him. He needed 3,000 parables. What does it mean? It means to say that the deeper, the lower it can come down. Al-Derech Zeh is benigir to the tchuna of both together. Side the union of depth, on the other hand, bringing it down to someone else. The personality of the Rebbe. Al-Derech Zeh, we see it in everything. The same thing is also benigir to understanding something. person is learning something, it's called Hafshata. Hafshata, that he's taking it out from its physical aspects. He's understanding it as it is higher than physical aspects. It's a letter from the Rebbe Rashab that he writes in the Friedrich Rebbe. Friedrich Rebbe is 34 years old, in the middle of the Hemshech Ayin Beis, and he writes to the Friedrich Rebbe writes to his father, what is Chassidus? Out of the blue, Tofresh Ayin Dalet, 34 years old, Azun von Arem, heard Samach Vov, heard Ayin Beis, in the middle of Ayin Beis, Mitamov was Chassidus. Rebbe Rashab writes in the letter, a very unusual letter. He writes, I don't know, I never delved into it. I studied, I exerted myself, I toiled myself in the study of Chassidus and hoping to understand the word. I never delved into the senior, what is Chassidus, into the Arun, the background. Then the Rebbe Rashab goes in the next paragraph where such a question comes from. Another geht weiter, that there's a mile in Chassidische Farbrengen, and the right Gebeiner one. And then after that, the Rebbe Rashab continues and begins explaining what is Chassidus. And he says the meaning of Chassidus is that when a person understands a concept of Chassidus, it's not understanding the concept as it is an entity for itself, but as it is an expression of a certain expression of Atzmus, expression of the Eibishter. And he brings two examples, two sets, Chachma Bina and the Malakarom and the Sefer Korom. He says Chachma Bina is Chachma, it's not Chachma alone, it's the Eibishter as he is already giving he's relating to the world on the level of Chachma. It's already the beginning of the relationship. Bina as he's a closer relationship. That is a Memala Kolom Sefer Korom, as he's Memala, as he said, everything is a likus. At the end of the letter he writes, I am writing to you on the condition that you shouldn't make any copies of it. This letter was printed in Tafshin Mem 1980 by Rabbi Shua Munshine al-Mashalim in a Sefer Migdal Eis, was a big Sefer there, and he writes on the bottom on what basis he published it. The Rebbe always asked people to publish, even though they were told by their ancestors, different citizens, different circles, don't publish it. The Rebbe published. The Rebbe encouraged to publish. But Mela also this thing was published. A few years later, Rebbe Rashab's letters were published by Kohos. He published the letter. Right, what's the source? He says, look in Migdal Eis. Look in Migdal Eis, you'll see the sources. It's like referring back to an earlier Sefer that has the sources. The whole from that letter is a letter which is Matan Torah for understanding Chassidus. That's a Shabbat doesn't even know about that letter. It's a letter, second volume of the Igros Kodesh. It's an Omud that you can never forget. Tafshin Yud Dalet. And it's a letter that goes on for 4 or 5 pages. Nun Dalet. Second volume is Tafshin Nun Dalet. 754. It's a hemshech from the first volume. The letter is dated Kazayim Tevis, Tafresh Ayin Dalet. Ayin Dalet. No, it's the hemshech. Akaparim L'chaim, the name says, "Ahelfun Amazonem Dinyanim." The Rebbe says is benegia to the depth and the simplicity. The Rebbe says is benegia to Friedrich Rebbe. We find it that on one hand he was asik, he was involved in deep Maimarim. On the other hand, he wanted that children should be educated, raised with the union of the olive ways, chulu. So basically the two tzavas the Rebbe says, the amkus and the union of the pashtus. The chayim, which should be matzliach and bi'al yonim. Isfirim was with our Isfirim. Chayim. One of the Rabbis they do it. Nims We find Benegia to we're focusing on the Rebbe's father's ksovim. So we find one of the inyanim that we learn from the Rebbe's father's ksovim is basically that every word is accurate, every letter is accurate, and the mela when there's a inyan in Torah, when there's a inyan in Desaya, it shows that what it means and what it reflects and what it signifies. Everything is b'diuk, every prat. Which in the same sense that every inyan is b'diuk when it comes to Torah, because everything is lechaser v'leyater, not less, not more, which shows the accuracy, which means that it comes from atzmos, who's higher than all the medillas v'agbolas, limitations. Is al derech zeh, we find that also the diuk, that every pintel has to be exactly as is. We find it in the time, we find it in the space, the place. In time, we find there's a sikha from the Rebbe in Tavshin Memches. The Rebbe speaks about how, when we look at a body of water, a whole body of water, so we see that the whole sun shines on it. What if the muscle, you take a drop of water from this body of water, and you separate it, and you put it to a different place, how much of the sun shines on it? The whole sun shines on it. It doesn't divide it. Although it's just a unit of water, everything shines on it. The Rebbe says, what do we see from this? That in every unit of water, the whole sun is reflected. So the Rebbe says the same thing is also b'negia to time. The time cycle of the world is 6,000 years. And every nikuda of the 6,000 years is a piece of a puzzle and completes the whole 6,000 years. Mela, the Rebbe says, when a person comes and he argues, I'm rich in time, what does it hurt if I waste a few moments? A few moments, it won't be fulfilled. So the Rebbe says that this shows us that when it comes to a unit in time, in it is reflected the whole purpose of the Ishtalsul, so the whole chain of creation. And the Mela, it's the whole sun is reflected. Likewise, the whole chain of creation is reflected. It was the only time that I saw it in the Sikha from the Rebbe. And B'Shas Maisa, if we would know it's from the Rebbe, we would think it's from a Musar Sefer. So it's very, very, you walk out for such a Farbrengen that every minute is, whatever you're doing, the whole Ishtalsul is depending on that. It's a part of the puzzle, it's a whole slings, which this shows Benegir Binyan Ozman. Dr. Later in the Igris, I saw the Rebbe refers to it in the newer Igris, newer volumes of the letters, Although by Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about it in Mamish Beprotis. That shows what the union of time is. The accuracy and the uniqueness of every Rega. The Rebbe also, besides the Rebbe spoke to youth, to Neyar. So the Rebbe said that also every day, everything, every moment of time should be fulfilled. The Rebbe said, especially when it comes to young people, that they, because their body grows, so the male also in a spiritual sense, they can grow beruchnius. And the Rebbe says, they can go. They can remove ton the floys, dailies, vinifloys every day. Great things and wonders, more than one who's already in the 20s. Because by 20, 21, the body stops growing. Since it's growing with significant pace, the male in ruchnius is the same thing. That a person has the keach to accomplish that. The Rebbe spoke to a group of girls from Beis Rivka, Messiahs of Beis Rivka, and they as teenagers. And the Rebbe, the American word was Mendalet, to the Talmidas HaMessiahs. So Al-Kaponim, this shows Be'etzem how the Rebbe says, but they have to utilize it. They have to utilize the time, fulfill the time. And as Siddur explains that besides a person fulfills the day, he accomplishes that this is a garment for his neshama. He accomplishes that there's an additional garment for his neshama, levush. Chaser yema chada, chaser levush chada. He misses one day, he misses one garment. So maybe every day is a bezunderinya. And the man in the minya.
So levush chada can be mashing the net.
I never saw it, but it's like and he says, and the question is, what's an Igiyah day? What by the end of the week he does all the mitzvahs? Who cares? So the Rabbi explained from the middle of the Alter Rebbe, that the Etzemian is that it has to be the springboard is the day. That's where B'Shas and the mitzvah comes down here. It's like a ball that bounces and bounces back. So basically, it's the day and the asiyas hamitzvah of the person. So it's a very powerful thing that a day goes by without nothing. It's a bitter. So upon him, this shows person that every day has to be fulfilled. There's a Maaseh, 41. That's already 41 years ago already. This was Chodesh Kislev, Tavshin Mem Aleph. The Rebbe called in Rabbi Chodikov, and the Rebbe says he wants they should make an index, Mafteach, on all the Alter Rebbe's Maimonim. There were 11 svarim. A lot of Hasidus Kabbalah, 11 svarim. When should they have it done? Not printed, done. The next time he goes to the Eyal, which is 9 days later. 9 days later.
Including Torah or?
Yeah, Terei the Rebbe already made, so it's they were just using that. But you're talking about Mamish new ones that didn't have any index. Tovkuf Samabei, Samagim, whatever they were. The Rebbe said he should take people that were experts in the Sinyan or have experience in the Sinyan, and people that are local, and to ask how much they want to get paid an hour. So Rabbi Chodikov finally made it to the Vadla Fatzasichas, and they decided they're going to give it over to, they're going to form a group for people that have a chusner, and they're going to make an asifa, but they don't know yet when the asifa will be, if it will be 1:30 or 3:30. Rabbi Chodikov comes back to the Rebbe. He tells the Rebbe that they're ready to begin, but they have to make an asifa, and they don't know when the asifa will be, 1:30 or 3:30. So the Rebbe said if they can make it, the Rebbe says 1:30, why do they have to wait till 3:30? And the use of the fulfillment of time. They finally started, it was Sunday Vayetze. And every day the Rebbe wanted a report. They started Vayetze. Everybody got copies of the pages of the Sefer, how much they have to cover, and they have to report the next day at the meeting, every evening, reporting to the Rebbe how many pages they covered. So
maybe make an index. Well, we just have to name the memory.
No.
What do you mean by an index?
Topics.
Oh, the topic.
Mafteach Inyanim. What's Mr. Divya Masan?
You said an index. I thought an index.
Yeah, index is Mafteach Inyanim.
Oh, Mafteach Inyanim. Cool.
Cataloging, whatever the topic, according to the topic. It's learning to see this en Kabbalah. Al-Kaponim, they started Sunday. They wrote to the Rebbe that they started. So the Rebbe said, Niskabel v'tach, that I received, and I appreciate it. And the Dover Be'iti, it's an appropriate, especially the Parsha Vayisa Yankiv Raglov. Yankiv uplifted his feet. He heard the good news. This is from that day's Parsha. The Rebbe tells Gifun and Tabun. I upon him, a day two later, the Rebbe is watching the pace, and the Rebbe writes a comment in one, I think it was Tuesday, Tzarechiyum, if they'll finish in time with this pace. The Rebbe saw the pages and everything. If they'll finish in time. They made the meeting the next day. They wrote into the Rebbe that in Mirza Hashem, Be'erzas Hashem, they will finish in Liyem HaMugbo, to the designated day. So the Rebbe circles Be'erzas Hashem. Although the Chitaf Nebesh places, Ezras Hashem, the Rebbe writes, Be'inyin Atzluah K'diboy, if they're going to use it in the appropriate way. In other words, the way is to do it. Then the Rebbe writes, Liyem HaMugbo, the Rebbe says, Medida v'Hakbola, the Lefnei Chedesh Kislev. In other words, you're saying the designated day, but Mugbo means limitation. In Kislev, you have a limited day, you have a limitation. You're bringing me things from before Kislev into Kislev. Maybe they'll finish before the Rebbe said. Finish before you that day. Agaponim, Siganget, Sitzakiton, there were people that couldn't keep up. They left. They dropped out. It was too much because they were doing other things, and here you have to learn them, and then you have to index it in your words. I was working then in Kahos, and they needed manpower. So I said, okay, I'll go in. One customer and another. Okay, we start to work. We have the meetings. Friday morning, the Rebbe comes to shul, and this is why I'm mentioning the story. The Hamshach to what we spoke before, that every day has to be fulfilled. The Rebbe asks, when is he getting the report for Friday? Friday Vayetze is one of the shortest Fridays. This mentioned about 10 after 4. So they told the Rebbe, Friday, Shabbos, Zuntik, Sunday will go together. So the Rebbe says you can't mix it together. Because Friday is from 1 week, and Sunday is another week. Every week has a separate sequence, a series of Shem Adna. You can't mix the This the Rebbe said Balpeh. Then the Rebbe wrote it like Tzepel, a little mild and not with this whole dogush. And the Rebbe said he's going to wait till before Lichtenstein. He's not going home till he waits about 5 to 4. They sent him the report, and the Rebbe went home and came back before Shabbos. But before that, if I'm not mistaken, the Rebbe asked when is he getting the Shmitzah Shabbos report. So they told the Rebbe Shabbos and Sunday goes together. So the Rebbe says no, Shabbos is the Shabbos Diketot, and Sunday is the Sunday day. Shabbos finished after 5. You had a whole week. When he finished that, they asked the Rebbe if the Rebbe wants to include his Mafteach and Tanya Tereira and Kutatera. The Rebbe made his own Mafteach. The Yud, the Chafsir, the Tafshin, the Rebbe said, yeah. Once everything was done, they made copies of all the index cards. They sent it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe took it to Dale. I think it was Nafax, took it to Dale. That's Kislev. Was the first time he went to Dale. Then the Rebbe wrote that Bevada Yagiu Heitev, they'll surely proofread it well. Uschus Admur Azoken Tamed Lecholecha Vecha Bakel. Uschus of the Rebbe should stand by for all. Al Kaponim, usually when the printer gives something, gives proofs, so he gives a few sets. One set is for the Rebbe, and then there is a set for the proofreaders, 1 or 2 sets. And I think the printer himself is left with one in case somebody lost something. Akapanim, by the Rebbe, it would usually be a security, that this would be by the Rebbe till a finished, complete Sefer came out. So this was like, sometimes Shabbos, the Rebbe would look at it, sometimes there's like a mark on the paper, there was a mistake, but the Rebbe relied on the proofreaders, but it would be as a mashkin, sort of. That's how it was. The Sefer came out, the Rebbe sent it out. Shameless or whatever. This time the Rebbe took it home. He told him, worked on it thoroughly. Corrections, omissions, Arain, Aruis, Isofis, Sitzachiton. The Rebbe caught a lot of mistakes, errors that were overlooked because the people that worked on it, their eyes were closing. Especially what the Rebbe wanted. I didn't tell you the second half. The second story is the Rebbe wanted that it should be printed for Yutas Kislev. And it should be sold for $1. That's the Maison of Rabbi Chodek patients. So tell me, Akoponim is given forever. The tale, the Rebbe picked up some errors, like perhaps Toys got Spheres Shaemer, as the Spheres were, some Chotoneshab, the Rebbe right away hacked it and separated one from another. By error, it was like under the same title. It was real pressure. It was finally done, and the Rebbe then was asked, or the Rebbe himself suggested a Hagdosha dedication for this Sefer. And usually a dedication is thousands of dollars. Somebody sponsors the Sefer, thousands of dollars. The Sefer Mishtomadoda, the Sefer HaMartichas, the Sefer Rabbeinu Hazokin, a red Sefer. So so Rabbi Chodek was told by the Rebbe that the Hagdosha should be for all the people that worked on it. Their names, and each one should pay $1.80. $1.80. And the people that worked on it, the proofreaders, the ganze Akoponim.
How many people were there?
There were total 27. But some were typesetters and some were the people that worked on it. It was like the different steps of the process. The question was also where to print it. No printer wanted a guarantee it should be ready for the season. So they printed it upstairs in the Vadla Patsasichas. And with their machines, they were not used to printing Mamish Svarim. So they printed it, they had enough paper for 250 copies. That copy today is a collector's item. And the difference is between this one and that one is that this one doesn't have a rim on the cover, a seal, like they make in the printing shops, because they didn't have the machine for that. So then you know this is the first edition. The Rebbe added something in the Pasagova, that this is an additional step in spreading the wellspring of Chassidus. Nidvach Neisach in Osimar, the last paragraph. Weiter. Was ich going weiter? Everybody got paid. Checks. The Rebbe said it should be according to the average, because some people are still demanding work in the jewelry shop, some less. The Rebbe said it should be the middle, average. So for some people, it's an eye-opener. Of course, it covered that never had a service to get such check. When the Rishima was handed into the Rebbe, the Rishima was supposed to be the name, the first name, the personal name, not the family name, and the mother's name. They're garnished. Came to Mem, Osmem, the Rebbe put in his two names, Ben Chana. Only time in history, in 42 years. In the beginning of the Messias, it never happened. Today it's printed in the Sefer HaMartichas from Rabbeinu Hazokin. Put in the name. They wanted to bold it, the Rebbe said no. They wanted to write Shlita, the Rebbe took the Shlita and pulled it on the bottom of everybody's name. They wanted to put the Rebbe on the beginning of a list from the next page, the Rebbe said no, it should remain here. The person who looks at it today and doesn't know this background, has no idea this is the Rebbe. Akoponim, the Sefer was published, it was sold out of the boxes. Before anything, everybody came, posted $1, which gave in minutes. And that was it.
What year was this? What year?
Mamalef, Dr. Mamalef.
Where did they get the money to make the
There, I don't know. There's money in the Kupa, that's what the Rebbe Tzchanei said. We never heard it. And I'll tell you, over 40 years, nobody asked questions. Akabonim, what happened was after that Hanukkah time, the Rebbe sent out $1 to everyone on the list. For years, for 30 years, Mamish, had it gerechnet that this is Hanukkah geld. The timing was Hanukkah. But so we got paid already the check. So what could it be? Then I was talking with another person who was involved in the Yonim, Rabbi Lipska. He says, no, there's a whole different story to it. He says, what happened was the Rebbe wanted that they should get paid mezuman. He says, it's not on the books. The Chadikov said, no, that's kemenish. Can't do it. So there was $1 at Maskim given, so Zayn mezuman. Chadikov later said that this is one of the biggest miracles that the Rebbe did, to make an index in 9 days. Index on a Rebbe's Svarim. Found out later that Rabbi Chadikov called up a person that makes indexes who lives in Canada, Mateches, Chav Cheshen, and he asked him if he can do it, be ready for you to skisel. He says he can't, one person he cannot do it. So the Peil Mamish, Shchei Dishkisel, the Rebbe turned to Rabbi Chadikov. So what is the point of the story? Every day has its fulfillment, and the Mela, this accomplishes the garment for the Neshama and the Aliyah for the Neshama. Because the Neshama comes out for a purpose, and maybe you can't just go in a cheap way, just a bulk thing. You'll do all the mitzvahs in one day in the week, because it's also connected, related tightly with the day itself. And this is basically the Nikuda, the Negia to the union of fulfilling time. As the Rebbe once mentioned in a Sikha, that we find it by the Mishkan, that the Mishkan, the Agolas, the wagons that were sponsored by the Mishkan, so they were sponsored with exactly the amount. So the Rebbe says, there's no union of poverty in a place where there's richness. So since there is no union of poverty in a place of richness, what says in the Migdash, which they even gave a korban tonit, a korban to drink from a golden cup, how is it that they were exactly that amount of wagons and not more? It seemed a little stingy. So the Rebbe says that this teaches us a lesson. That the Shas a Yid receives keiches, he has to fulfill it. If he doesn't fulfill it, he was created in vain. What is he accomplishing? He's causing that the Eibishter created something in vain. The Eibishter did not create something in vain. The Mele, if there was something that he's not using, not fulfilling, he's causing that it's created in vain. In Kamal Yonim, that if a person doesn't use the keiches, it's considered that it's Levatola. And the Mele, they gave them the Agolish, they didn't need more. If they would need more, it would be extra and not fulfilled. And therefore, it was Dafka that amount. Which the same thing is also many in Yonim, that the Rebbe always taught us and teaches us. It is stated that a person should fulfill, there should be an end of a fulfillment. He can accomplish another minute for Chulu, it's a whole fulfillment. There's once a Maisa we're talking about the union of Nikuda, of time. As you mentioned, the deal that even one letter in Torah is a whole world. You mentioned the Zayah, the Rebbe quotes from the Zayah that say, Minor Lashon, that B'shas there was a missing Sefer Torah. In a letter of Shisa, Shesa, there was a whole commotion in the higher worlds. Because the union of Oshin Torah has an impact. The Mela, when it comes to time, by the Rebbe, time and time. The Rebbe was a chiyuv for his father. He davened for the Omid, and he needed to rely on the chesed of the 770 Bachar. And the Mela, when the Rebbe came in, when the minyan had to start 9:30, sometimes someone was just putting on film there, and it's part of the minyan. The Rebbe's waiting. So there was once a message that the Friedrich Rebbe sent to the Elam: do not keep him waiting, because by him every minute is a year. Every minute is a year. There was another time that the Rebbe waited for an announcement from the Gabbai when they would daven Ma'ariv. It was after the Eil, I think. It was between Mincha and Ma'ariv. And after Mincha, the Rebbe was waiting, when are they going to daven Ma'ariv? So the Chazan, the Gabbai called out, in 10 minutes, in 5-10 minutes. So sofort to announce that in front of the Rebbe. 10 minutes, what's maintenance? Even a normal, regular shul, 5-10 minutes is what was it the Sapi Kabbalah was. So the Rebbe returns to the Gabe and says, Zayt Machlek, or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Between the Rebbe says, so we shall finish in 10 minutes is a whole 5 minutes that you can turn over the world. Says what the Rebbe Michoel, every minute was precious. He was standing, doing nothing. Once the Rebbe came out to Mayim Shalonu. Mayim Shalonu, the Rebbe came out, and it was before this man. We never saw the Rebbe in those few moments. The Rebbe was standing there, Pashit Umruyik. I wouldn't say, I don't want to say the word restless. Pashit Umruyik. Unsettled. Not the Yusuf. He didn't know what to do. He didn't go back to the room. He just decided to wait. And he's looking at, nobody knew what to do. We're waiting for this man. And the Rebbe is asking, where is this man? This man is already. It felt like a good 5 minutes. But again, we don't know because it's ancient, it's an anxiety. Like the Rebbe under the Talis Batkias also felt like a long time. It was a lot after. Nobody who was there could tell us the right time because we all felt intensity. And later, is the Chayach to know who's going to find the Vosven. Akoponim. So this was basically Chol Pasha by the Rebbe. Was he says it's late, it's doing nothing. Pasha short the time. It's. Alberach was also when the Rebbe was in Paris in Tafshin Zai in 1947, and the Rebbe was being. There was a chassid, Rabbi Yankel Lipsker, who would bring food, would do lunch to the Rebbe, and for example, I think it was 3:00. And he saw, it seemed to him that the door was closed. He didn't want to disturb the Rebbe, so he left. A while later, he sees that the door was open, somebody went in, whatever, so he's giving the Rebbe the lunch. The Rebbe says, I'm already past it. I'm up to the next slot. In other words, he wasn't waiting for the lunch. The lunch in his dog, the Rebbe continued working with the new hour or with the union that he was up to. So the Rebbe says, you have that from Yeshe Bogel. That basically, that shows that you need to fulfill. You need to fulfill time, you need to fulfill the keichas a person gets, the energy, and also the place. A person is in a certain place, he has a certain shlichus there. He has a certain a reason, a mission that was given to him, Hashem etzadi gever kenone, that the Eibush is the one that designates, selects, and that's the destination of the person, that he's coming there for a shlichus. He's coming there for Avedas Abirulim, as the Rebbe writes in Vayem Yem in the end of Tishrei. So I'll call upon him. This is basically the Nekuda that we learn from the Rebbe's father's data, that every word is b'diuk, accurate, and it's accurate because it comes from a higher Sheiresh, and the Meila Akedekach, that it can have an effect, Chas v'Sholem, if it's missing the data. One us, the Rebbe says above, can have an effect, because it is vital that every us is part of the whole thing. The same thing is also every unit of time is important. And every prat of our shlichus is important. Although together with the fact that we're told to keep time precious, we're also told that we need not Torah l'malachei asharis. Torah was not given to angels. But the Yachadim Zeh, person has to remember that there are inyonim that a person has to accomplish, and Einem Mevakashel Lifikecha. The Eibishter asks according to the Keach, to their Keach, and the Eibishter doesn't come with tricks. So the Eibishter expects what he expects. And the Eibishter is helping that we should all be able to fulfill our shlichus, everyone in their inyan, everyone hashgacha pratis, everyone where he is. It's his aveda, his shlichus, his mission to accomplish. And Octom does b'shleimus, b'simcha, to levav. Chaim. say something that I might on the YouTube. Huh? 2 minutes and a half. She would read Rav Zalman Posner's writings, book, Reflections on the Parsha, and she said, I keep it in my dresser every night. I read it before going to sleep. The Rebbe in the early Chos, he gave out articles of the whole Eiffel.
She told a Moshe fellow at the Bacher, he used to write in the Jewish press about, he used to give reports about activities. He started with Minnesota, he stopped.
Right.
So when he came here, she told him, I miss your articles. So he said that when I lived there, it's not so simple. So she thought maybe you could have continued because it was
Right. That later he wrote the thought, later it came out, yeah.
You would only write about Lubavitch activities and said that it was very nice that the Jewish press had to meet now, but not necessarily.
Right. There was another 2 inyanim that the Rebbe, the Kud has been a gift to his mother, and one of them is in Tavshin Memhei. It was 1985, 20 years after the Stalkut, the Tira of his mother, 20th yahrzeit. The Rebbe spoke then as an exception the night before, after Ma'ariv. As soon as he finished Ma'ariv, the Rebbe spoke a Sicha. And then in the daytime also, the Rebbe said then, I think, about funding mikvahs. There was a whole inyan there. At the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about the refugees that came from World War I that ended up in the Pashat in Yevtanoslav, and some ended up in the Rebbetzon's house, the Rebbetzon and her husband. So the Rebbe's parents, they had them in the house. And the Rebbe mentioned on another occasion that there were certain Chassidim, Pelish Chassidim, and the Rebbe found out later that they were Gerech Chassidim. And the Rebbe said he spoke with such an accent, he wasn't used to it, a Pelish accent. And the Rebbe mentioned it after the Ptira, the Tztachos of the Ger Rebbe and Beis Yisrael. The next Shabbos, the Rebbe spoke the Yachas between Ger, Kotsk, and Chabad. And the Rebbe mentioned al derech that he had experiences when he got to the Ger, a shlichus of Nicham Avelon that the Rebbe sent him. The Rebbe says, I didn't know why he's sending me. And then the Rebbe said once in the story about in his own house, how as a teenager, these guests came to the table. The one was a brother-in-law of the Ger Rebbe. So upon him, the Rebbe says that they were plating. There was a big operation going on. And the Rebbe said he found out later, Benatzad, that his mother was the one running the show. Which means that there were things happening, she didn't talk about it. Aber sie gefilt. She did what needed to be done. So the Rebbe takes out a limud from that sometimes you find a Yid who is a refugee. And he's not Ben Kame, he's not where he's supposed to be. He's in exile, he's wandering. And the Mela, the Indian is that to be Makara that Yid should be returned back, Mishavu Valim Likvulam should be returned back to the boundary. And this is what the Rebbe said, that this is the matzav of Golos. When Yid are in Golos, the Mela, that's an Indian of a matzav of Platim, refugees, and to see to it that a Yid that finds himself, as the Rebbe said, the Lashon, V'shova Volim L'Gvulam, V'negia to Rachel Imeinu. So yes, he finds himself in Golus, and besides he's brought closer to Yiddishkeit, the Neila, it brings the V'shova Volim L'Gvulam Begashmis, that Yidden will return back to their borders. And this is basically what everyone spoke, Asicha, Parsha Vachi, V'negia to Rachel Imeinu. Noch even noch an Nekuda that the Rebbe spoke once, Asicha, B'negia to the efforts of the Rebbetzin, although she was working against the whole tide of pressure, discomfort, pain, agony, and b'yachad im zeh, in addition to that, her husband was already sick then, the machla. So Mela, it was made a dikagmas nefesh, but she pushed, and whatever she needed to do, she went through it. The Rebbe said, b'negia to the ink from grass. The Rebbe says she pushed it, b'chatchila, did it, she was determined, and she went out and she did it. And the Rebbe continues then, and the Rebbe says that this teaches us that sometimes a person feels something is difficult, and the Mela, what do we have to start? Was that in the Demarange? The Rebbe says that this shows how much the determination. She decided that she is be'etzem going to do it, and she's going to go through it. She accomplished it. She accomplished that b'shas there are the ksovim of the Rebbe's father. So we have today the Rebbe's father's Torah all over the world. All over the world, and in the matzav of tfus, the data datus. The data datus means poshit eternal. That's the meaning of tfus. This was a big nachas ruach for the Rebbe when the Svarim came out, and it shows was haste determined. Was haste, the person does something, and sometimes a person feels he doesn't get acknowledgement, and not only he doesn't, sometimes he feels agmas nefesh. He feels an agony that the Indian did not end up in the right way. So da kommt rein a Sipur, in the Geertz Hayid, his name was Rabbi Yankiv Yehuda Majeski, father of Rabbi Majeski, Chaim Rabbi Shlomo Majeski, and it was in Tavshin Chavtes 1969. The Rebbe asked, he was in Yechidus, and it was after the 6-Day War, and the young Israel on Eastern Park was dwindling, was going downhill, the shul, and there were many Sefer Teiros. Was he gelegen dem Rebbe Mikop? What was in the Rebbe's mind? They take maybe the Sefer Teiros to Yisrael, because there's mitzad the matzav after the 6-Day War. I say to do some more shuls. So he says, I'm not the gabbai, I'm not the balabos. What should I do? So the Rebbe said, check with them. He was the shamash. Check with them. He checks with them. To his surprise, they agreed. Many Sefer Teiros, they weren't already used. The Elam already went down. The Minyan went down. The number. Upon him, he's supposed to take it to Yisrael. So he's a Menayel in Beis Lifke, principal in Beis Lifke. Rabbi Majeski was the principal in Beis Lifke. He's supposed to go to Yisrael. But a snowstorm breaks out. It's a big blizzard there in 1969. 1 week, no yeshiva, no schools, not very well. And that the mayor was upset with the weatherman. How come they didn't predict that? It's like the Chayvikaya. Akaponim. So the mayor, somehow the planes were running at a certain point. He flew to Yisrael with the Sefer Torah, one or more. He took it to Yisrael. He brought it to Teras Emes. And Sefer Torah came, they greeted him. This is very low key. And they put it in Torah Kedesh, finished. He didn't chapsach what was going on there. He expected a Sefer Torah that's being brought. The Rebbe sent the Sefer Torah. But a parad, Epis was with a commotion. He felt very down after that. It was Purim time. Yeah, Rabbi Majeski comes back. This is the father. He comes back and he writes a letter to the Rebbe that he feels that this was very cold-blooded. A few days later, they made a whole thing of it, but they had a whole plan of it. He couldn't stay already. He had to go back, so he wasn't even part of it, and he wanted to be part of it. The Rebbe didn't answer him anything. After Pesach, Bakeshel Bracha, and the After Pesach Farbrengen, he goes over for Kesel Bracha. The Rebbe said to him the following: Sie genug, I'll say it first in Yiddish, Lashon Rabbeinu. Sie ist genug, as me weiß da und dort. It's enough that they know here and there. And Memela, you did your thing. Which is
we know
here, the Rebbe knew.
know here and
In other words, you don't have to worry about this went up is lopsided. Die was davon wissen weisen. So basically, what it shows is that sometimes a person feels that wasn't acknowledged. People weren't excited about it. Dr. Rebbe had to, you did your part, it hit home. And the Mela, you should know that you accomplished what you needed to accomplish. And this is that's a meirov and everything. That b'shas a person does something, the Rebbe says a person shouldn't feel he doesn't have too much assistance, he doesn't have support, and then he has people that are opposing it. So the Rebbe says, you push yours. The Rebbe said the Lashon, this was a Yirah, the Rebbe said, that although he finds himself in limitations, the Rebbe said in the Farbrengen, when we get to the Rebbe, that although he finds himself in limitations, Yachad Himzeh, The highest that he has is the bleak wool, and that should overcome his limitations. The Mela he'll be able to break through. So the Mela, this is the Irgun everything. The Rebbe will push. The pusher should be satisfied, and push it, reach whatever he needs to reach, because basically a person has to be a mahalach. As the Rebbe once told a person who was niskaref, niskaref to Chabad, but probably was connected with Chabad. He asked the Rebbe, who do you consider a chassid? The Rebbe said, one who gets up the next morning and decides that he has to accelerate higher and more than he did yesterday, I will be proud that he's my chassid. And this is basically by the Rebbe, the Rabbi Michoel Seligson. The talk of Mitzvah, when the Bachrim came from Tishrei, the Bachrim came, Rabbi Michoel came then, Farbrengen came, it was a good shot. He came a while later, Shabbos Breishis, the next year, 3/4 year later, the Rebbe asked, who's in that Tishrei Bachrim? Where that Tishrei Bachrim? So they told the Rebbe, he aimed them, they're standing here and here. So the Rebbe says they shouldn't be aimed them, they should be mahalchim. They're not stand in one place. Aim them is they're satisfied what they're doing. Like the malachim. They're taka saying Kodesh, but every step ahead is in the range of the previous step. So Al Kapanim, the Rebbe says a helpful that we should be able to fulfill what the Rebbe wants from us. And the Rebbe wants feeling Kemimios, Latzeinu, Agdesha, Yerushalayim, B'Samigdash, and Kedesh HaKadosh, and L'chaim, L'chaim, he was that nach Habracha Chreina, nach Habracha Chreina. Yeah. Baruch Hashem. Yeah, Gamma Shigia van Roman, no? Du hast das schon Zeit.
And then we gave the Hasidus, nobody came, and the Rebbe came, and he said,
I wanted to ask you, the person who is accustomed to lighting candles, Shabbos, Yom Tov, whatever, they missed that. Adam, yeah?